I'd like to call to order this planning meeting of the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores, and welcome all members of the committee and welcome all members of the public who are watching us on the live stream this evening. We're glad that you're with us. The second item on the agenda is additions, deletions, amendments. We don't have any of those. Third is disclosures of pecuniary interest. I'll ask any member if you have one of those you'd like to declare at this time. Seeing none, of course, you can do that anytime if you need to. We have 4 public meetings this evening, 2 of which are being held under the Planning Act, and the third one, the Public Information Center on the Water and Wastewater Servicing Master Plan, is a public information center and is not being held under the Planning Act. So we'll start with the public meetings, and before I get into them, I'll just let everybody know who's listening how they will proceed. Each meeting will begin with a presentation from the county planner, following which I will open the floor for comments from members of the public. And after that, we will take comments, questions from members of the public or from members of council for clarification. I'll just remind all members of the public as well that on each of these public meetings, each of the files on these public meetings, council will not be making decisions on these matters this evening. We're having these meetings so that we can hear from you, and they will be returning to council at subsequent meetings for final decisions. All right, so that moves us on to our first one, 4.1, Z 2021-001 for 2536112 Ontario Incorporated, care of Saba. And we will turn it over to the planner, Barbara Mugati.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Charbonneau, for this opportunity to present this development proposal. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you fine.
Okay, so the purpose of this public meeting is to present the application to committee and to obtain feedback from members of the public. It is intended that staff will return with a recommendation report which will address comments arising from the public meeting. Mr. Saba's property is in the settlement area of Southampton and fronts onto Bruce Road 13 at its south end, and the unopened road allowance portion to Copway Street to the north. The site is 5.7 acres in size and is fully forested. Surrounding land uses are residential and woodland/wetland. Servicing for proposed development will be through municipal water and sewers.
Hey, Barbara, just
yes.
I don't want to interrupt, but are you trying to present or share a screen for us? Because we don't have that at the moment, if that's the case.
Yes, I am trying to share a screen.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, okay. So the proposed access is through a county road, Bruce Road 13, and through a municipal road, Copway Street. The purpose of this zoning application is to rezone the subject lands from planned development to residential first density special holding R190-H and R191-H and environmental protection. The special provision is to permit 3 dwelling units on one development area and 7 dwelling units on a second development area. Whereas the R1 zone only permits 1 dwelling unit on a parcel of land. The development areas are separated by an environmental feature. The landowner will retain ownership of the units and will list them. There is no new lot creation proposed. With regards to the provincial policy statement, the policies that are applicable are those in reference to the settlement area, as the subject land is within the settlement area of Southampton. The site is designated primary urban communities in the Bruce County official plan, and residential and significant woodland overlay in the local official plan. The zoning is residential first density R1. In terms of supporting studies, we received a planning report prepared by Ron Davidson, land use planning consultant. There was also an archaeological assessment report prepared by Scarlett Janusas, and a natural heritage environmental impact study prepared by AWS environmental consultants. We circulated the application to the departments and members of and agencies for their comments. The town of Saugeen Shores has commented that they are supportive of the unique tenureship of housing proposed. They suggested using the R1 zone instead of an R3 zone with special provisions to better reflect the housing type proposed and to confirm the limitations on what may be developed in the long term. The town may use site plan control to confirm the design and construction requirements of the proposed access. The developer may wish to consider connecting the road all the way to the county road. They recommend integration of the proposed environmental protection measures in the appropriate zone. The Bruce County Transportation Services has commented that access onto Bruce Road 13 should be 90 degrees or perpendicular to the county road. The Conservation Authority finds the application acceptable, provided mitigation measures of the environmental impact study are implemented through site plan control. There is quite a bit of interest that has been expressed by members within the community. We've received several written comments, mostly just seeking confirmation about the R3 zone and the multi-unit dwellings. They're asking if there are townhouses or apartments proposed. And in light of these comments, instead of using an R3 zone consisting of single detached dwellings, we are now recommending an R1 zone. However, this zone only permits one single detached dwelling on a lot. Therefore, special provision is required to permit 3 single detached dwellings on one development area and 7 single detached dwellings on the second development area. A question was posed, what is being done to address the need for proper drainage of the runoff from the swamp, and how will the new builds affect the water table? The ecologist has indicated that efforts will be made to avoid impact to groundwater table. A geotechnical investigation and detailed servicing design has not yet been completed. The question was posed, how will the road access at the far end of Ottawa Avenue off Copway Street affect the Copway Trail? The ecologist has again indicated that the trail will be converted into a sidewalk where the trail conflicts with the new roadway. Pedestrian access to the trail will not be blocked. With respect to the question about whether development fees will be waived for this project, I would say no. Development fees will be applicable to the project. There was a comment that the applicant should consider to undertake an environmental impact study. And the response is that the environmental impact study has been undertaken and the findings and recommendations have been incorporated into the report. Will fences be constructed to partition the new houses from the wetland area? The response is that a fence is not one of the recommendations of the environmental impact study. The consultant advises that the developer prefers not to have a fence as it may result in maintenance requirements. There was a question asked about site and building plans, if these will be filed and will the public be notified? The site plan agreement stage comes after planning approvals and prior to issuance of building permits. The comments that we've received through this planning process will be addressed through the site plan approval process. The applicant should deal with the emerald ash borer infestation and should cut down and remove the dead and dying trees was another comment that we've received. The ecologist has advised that there is no requirement in the environmental impact statement to remove dead trees, the preference being for trees to decompose in place. Someone wanted to know if the temporary driveways are wide enough for emergency vehicles. Will they have access to fire hydrants? I just want to note that there are no temporary driveways. There's a private road that is proposed. There will be a 6-meter setback from the houses to the paved road, and a rear yard of 7.5 meters is proposed. All proposed dwellings meet the minimum space requirements for the hydrants. The drawing does not show the culvert behind lots 1 to 3 was one of the comments that we received, as well as is remedial work to be done to ensure that the culvert will be kept, cleaned, and enhanced to handle the extra drainage from the new lots. The answer is that lot grading and drainage plan will be required at the site plan agreement stage. The engineer will take into consideration existing drainage of the site and will ensure that the development will not flood the backyards of existing development. Will trees and shrubs be kept on each side of the culvert to buffer the new from the old? The answer is that this will depend on whether the improvements to the ditch are required. Mr. Saba wishes to preserve as many trees as possible, as trees also give the property its charm. The comment was made, the end onto Kopwe Street would lead all of the traffic down Ottawa Street, which already is very busy with the current subdivision flow. The applicant's consultant has advised that about one car every 8 minutes will be driving on Ottawa Street, that the street will have no problem accommodating this minor increase in traffic. Just as a recap, this zoning bylaw amendment is requested to rezone the subject lands from planned development to residential first density special holding R1-90-H and R1-91-H and environmental protection. The zoning bylaw amendment will facilitate the construction of 3 single detached dwellings on one development area and 7 single detached dwellings on a second development area. The development areas are separated by an environmental feature. No new lot creation is proposed, as the owner will retain ownership of all 10 dwellings and will list them. With respect to the recommendation, we are recommending that zoning bylaw amendment application Z1 be received as information. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Barbara. Then we'll turn it over to members of the public, and we'll begin with the applicant. And there's 4 representatives of the applicant here this evening: Ron Davidson, Peter Saba, Laura Swanson, and John Morton. And so maybe we'll bring them in all together, and we can hear from them as a group. So maybe we'll begin with you, Mr. Davidson.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, can I be heard okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Perfectly, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I shall be brief, and thank you for that introduction. Peter Saba is the owner of the property, and he's on the line tonight. We brought John Morton in as well. John is a wildlife expert, and there were a number of questions asked by the neighbors, the questions pertaining a lot to the natural environment. And John's got a few things to say about that. He has conducted an environmental impact study on the property, of course, but he will try to add to that and try to address some of the questions that we've already seen in the last couple of weeks come across the desk. And also Laura Swanson's on the line. Laura is the engineer. She is the engineer with Daryl Robbins and Associates, and she designed this this project. We all had a say in the matter, and of course, John Morton had a say in the matter as well, because he was the one that identified the area that we can't touch and can touch, so to speak. So, anyways, the 3 of us here are certainly here to answer questions, or 4 of us, I guess, of Peter. There are questions of Peter, but John, like I said, in about 30 seconds, will be speaking next. So just to be clear, these lands are designated residential in the official plan. There's no doubt about it that a good chunk of the land can't be developed, and they should be designated hazard or environmental hazard. But the fact is, though, the rest of the lands are residential, and the residential policies do give consideration to development. In fact, as council is well aware, the residential policies give consideration to a variety of housing types and densities in this area where there's water and sewer. So you could see a much higher density on this property, but that's not what Peter wants. What Peter does want, and he's made this very clear, he wants a housing type that's going to take into consideration and reflect 2 things: the adjacent land uses, those being the detached dwellings, and also take into account the fact that there's a lot of natural heritage features around the site. Lots of trees, and there's wetlands as well. So that's why Peter's simply going with something, a low density development of this sort. Oddly enough, if you look back, and perhaps Barbara touched on this, I missed the beginning of her presentation. This was a whole plan of subdivision. That's why the street goes right through the middle of it. Probably back in the 50s or 60s, somebody likely realized after it was approved that it was kind of wet in there. at least the area that we can't touch. And that's why you don't see those 32 or 33 lots that were originally proposed in there. I just throw that in there for in case anybody wants to know why the road was put through. Pardon me, the road allowance is owned by the municipality, but the road itself was never put through. Your worship and members of council, that's it for my presentation. I think it's best that we get right into the important part. That's the wildlife part, and John Morton's going to speak next to that. I thank you.
Morton.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we hear you.
Okay. I don't know if the video's on or not.
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay. To address some of the questions that were brought forward by the general public, there was one comment dealing about turtles. An EIS is kind of an inventory snapshot in time. You follow Bruce County guidelines and provincial guidelines on when you're to be out there, how many times per year, and so forth. I did identify a wetland. I did inventory work for amphibian breeding and for turtles. I didn't see any turtles. Not saying they're not there, but I didn't see them when I was there. But I did do a fair bit of amphibian work, and it came out to meet provincial criteria for significance, meaning that there was a lot of frogs and toads that were breeding in that wetland area that's been identified. And that's why it was kind of highlighted within my report. Being a wetland and that it's flooded, yes, I fully anticipate there probably will be turtles in there. I just didn't see them. But the EIS has recommended the wetland to be protected for its ecological functions, and that includes turtles and turtle habitat. So the wetland is being protected within the site plan. There is an upland buffer zone all around the wetland to allow for turtle nesting and wildlife movement and so forth. Plus there is a forested linkage corridor to the north, which provides linkage to off-site upland habitat, which is where some frogs and turtles may move to at certain times of the year for life cycle functions. So that aspect has been addressed. There was some concern about trees and fencing. In regards to the fencing, I would be very apprehensive to have a chain link fence that would impede small mammals or amphibians or reptiles from moving. An amphibian can get through a chain link fence, but a turtle cannot, or small mammals cannot. When you look at the site plan, the only area that would even deem to be needing fencing would be the east side of lot 3 and the south side of lot 4. Those are the only sections of those of all the lots that are adjacent to the wetland. The other lots that have tree corridors or treat areas at the back of the lots, they're butting up against somebody else's property, not the wetland. So I wanted to make that distinction clear. So there's only 2 little areas that we would be looking at fencing. Now, Peter has said that yes, there's ongoing maintenance concerns and stuff of that nature. From an ecological standpoint, I would not encourage fencing because it can cause, as I said, amphibian and small mammal movement problems. You could put some stakes out or a split rail fence that has more of a visual identification to it to discourage people from dumping leaves or debris or anything like that within the wetland buffer zone. But beyond that, I certainly wouldn't want to see a fence put in there that could do any impediment of wildlife movement. The other issue was dealing with dead trees, and it's becoming an issue all across Grey Bruce County with emerald ash borer coming through rampantly in the last few years. And I would just state that, to me, it's part of the ecology. I don't think Peter or anybody, any of the individual lot owners that purchase these lots should be responsible for going out and cutting down dead trees. If they want to, for a safety reason for their own home, then sure. But dead standing trees that are in wetlands provide ecological function for perching, for forage habitat, and for fallen trees, they provide, they decompose and they provide nutrients to the wetland. They provide cover habitat. They provide basking habitat for turtles. So I would recommend within the wetland area just to leave it as is. Don't worry about emerald ash borer. It's part of the life cycle of a forest. Those trees will get replaced by probably silver maple or balsam poplar over time. Beyond that, I think I touched on everything that was raised in regards to wildlife concerns. The wetland is protected. There's a buffer zone that's being around it to sustain ecological functions. And there's also the wildlife linkage corridor to offsite lands to allow for wildlife movement back and forth. If there's any other questions, I'd be free to answer.
Okay, thank you. How about Mr. Saba, Ms. Swanson, do you have comments that you'd like to make?
Hi, Mr. Mayor. It's Peter. Can you hear?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Like what attracted me to that piece of land actually, because my legal description was, lot 1 to 33, and so I thought the one who did that subdivision in Ottawa, he gone through the environments and the rest of the stuff needed to do it. But when I search it a little bit further, and that's when I find out it's been lapsed long time ago, and there is a new regulation now. It's completely different, and that's when I went to town and tell me what you need. So they told me what they need, and I really get it for them. I got all the study needed for it, and my thing is it's not going to be individual law. It's going to be one owner to all of them, so nobody can touch a tree without me knowing or whatever. And my idea with it is kind of I couldn't find a zoning like for cottages like then we have in Fort Elgin, these 5, 10, 15 cottages. So I don't know where they come up with high density and townhouses and high rise and all this. It never be my attention to do anything besides residential houses where I could rent them long-term, short-term, and they're all going to be one owner. I have in my mall 3 franchise restaurants. People want to come and rent them. They want to come as staff. They want to come with their family. I can't find them anything. So I thought I did everything I can, and I'm willing to do. If somebody wants more stuff, I'll get it. But if someone would object to something, I will be more than happy to listen. But I wish before they object to something, they could have their own study to tell me if it's any different from John's study. Or, but they reject to just something because they don't like. And some of the comment was really hurtful. I mean, that's all I'm going to say. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Saba. Ms. Swanson, I see you came on there. Do you have some comments?
I can address specific questions that come up, but I just thought I'd mention that we haven't done the full detailed design yet, but the intent is for stormwater. The intent is, though, of course, that we'll obtain all the approvals that are needed either through the SVCA or the Ministry of the Environment. And generally, for all developments, you're required to control your post-development flows to pre-development. So that's the intent that we will do. And we've kind of done some preliminary work looking at that, but we're going to get there. It's just for the purposes of the zoning amendment, those other items will be taken care of through site plan control.
Okay, well, so We'll just ask all you folks to hang on the line there. And if there are questions from members of the committee or members of the public, then we may be calling on you to address those. But for now, we do have a couple of members of the public who would like to speak to the application. So we'll bring in the first one. That's Mr. Dave Hawthorne. Mr. Hawthorne.
Unmute.
There
All
you
right,
are.
I think I am unmuted right now.
Yes, you are. Welcome.
Okay, good stuff. Thank you very much. I had posted comments in. I didn't see them, any of them raised on Barbara's précis there, but that's okay. And I'm glad John's here because really, I guess one of my comments, it would be best answered by him. And that was with regard to the wildlife corridor at the north end, which cuts across Copway, comes from the north property. I'm not sure who owns that. That particular bit there cuts across Copway and into the forest. By the way, we live at number 88 Ottawa, so we're behind the 7 unit developer. They're going to be behind us. And when I look at the plan, there's supposed to be a buffer zone put back there. I think it says no development should be permitted within a 15-meter wide retained forest wildlife group corridor along the northern limit of the study land. But it's being completely bisected and largely wiped out because there's a driveway and I may be wrong, a sidewalk beside it. So John, how do those two things square? And I think you're probably the best person to answer that, being the author of the EIS.
Mr. Morton, do you have a comment?
Oh dear, is he still here?
He might just be having a, take him a second to unmute here. Let's see if, oh,
Yes, hello, am I coming through?
yep, you're there. Go ahead.
Okay, yes, in regards to the corridor that I believe he was referring to is kind of like on lot 10.
Yep.
Yeah, pardon me?
Yes.
Yes. So right now, the road that's going into the property has got a curve to it, and there's a minimum, and you got to remember this, that's a minimum forest retained cover area that runs along through there. Even though it's not shown on the site plan, that's still forested land on the west side of that road curve between there and the Bruce County, and even further to the south. So that corridor area is just meeting the minimum requirement, but there is forested on both sides. Even that minimum requirement is sufficient because corridor linkages go by the distance of how far an animal has to move from point A to point B. The further that distance is, the wider the corridor should be, and that's per provincial guidelines. And such that if an animal has to go from point A to point B, and that's 200 meters long through an open field or along a roadway or whatever it is, then typically you may be wanting a corridor that might be 35 to 50 meters wide. Shorter lengths, you can have a narrower corridor. So in this particular case, because I'm not sure the exact length, it's maybe about 40 or 50 meters long before it gets up the Copway. There is also recognized linkage corridor on the subdivision to the north. So it's directly in alignment with that corridor linkage, and the design and the location of it is sufficient for primarily mammals. Your reptiles and amphibians, they'll be moving wherever the habitat is suitable for them. But for large mammals, that's kind of the linkage area that they'd be moving through there. And for large mammals, you're looking at maybe 2 or 3 minutes to traverse that, and that's it. So it's sufficient in width. Having the sidewalk there is not a problem. Even though that intrudes a little bit into the buffer zone, it's only pedestrian walkway, and I don't know how much human activity would get because it goes to the dead end for those 7 lots, so I don't anticipate there'd be a lot. So based on those, I have no concern with the corridor linkage as it's shown. I believe it will function. That's required, and it's suitable for the type and size of the development that's being proposed and on these lands. That's all.
Okay, thank you. You have
Okay.
more comments, Mr. Hawthorne?
Well, first, thanks, John. That it's always good to hear from the expert. There's just so much you can put in a report, and you can't put it all in. The second one was, well, I'm sorry to hear that Mr. Saba has had some pretty adverse stuff thrown at him by the sounds of it. That is not fair. There is, let's be honest, there's a certain amount of NIMBYism, and people hear rental and they kind of lose their stuff a little bit. This town does need more rental. There's no two ways about it. I'll say that, and I back onto the property. No big thing for me. My sole concern is that we just don't end up with Airbnbs back there and becoming, as it said in my letter, party central. I don't think that is what Mr. Saba has any intention of. Basically, I want some reassurance that that's not going to happen, in as much as anybody can control it in a legal sense.
Maybe Mr. Saba has some comments to that. Mr. Saba?
Yes. No, rest assured, I don't like Airbnb. That's not what's going to be there. It's going to be a long-term, mostly like for family or staff, for people working here. They want to be secure, like they have when they rent. They don't want to be the next minute to look for other place because the guy sold this unit or this and that. That's going to be, just a long-term rental. And if somebody wants short-term rental, like if they hear on a contract with Bruce, for example, for 6 months, is okay with me. And but no, I'm not going to run Airbnb there. I don't like them in anything.
Okay, any other
Stuff.
comments?
Thank you very much. Nope, that's all.
All right, thank you very much. All right, then that moves on to our final member of the public who's expressed an interest in speaking tonight, and that's Mr. Josh Smith. Mr. Smith, are you, oh, I see his name there. There he is, Mr. Smith. You're on mute there, Josh.
I think we're good now.
Yep, we got you now.
Okay, so a little bit about myself. I live at 106 Ottawa, which is the 9th setting kind of thing, like around there, 9th and 8th setting of where this planning is supposed to go. Like it's supposed to back onto the property. Just things that I've saw that kind of like question it's not directed towards anybody. It's just, I see like the professionals or whatever talking and they're giving like their keywords and it sounds all great. So my issues are like the assessment that was done. And like, I've done my own little assessment back there, just seeing animals going through my property. And I've seen like 2 turtles this year, plenty of snakes going back underneath my chain link fence. And I know that you guys said that they can't get through there, but like when I see things that are the exact opposite from what I'm hearing from you guys, just using the keywords, it kind of throws me off even more. Like the certain thing where it's like the tree charm that interested like Peter Saba into this area, but instead we want to put 7 or 10 like single houses in a treed area. I don't understand like some of the terms that are used. So the issue, and I want to go back to that same thing at the end there where that animal corridor comes in. It doesn't seem suitable to me that the 15 meters backs onto the road. Like that's all that's left. And I understand that that's what they say is needed for the corridor. But like, that's literally where it is. It's going to push deer out towards the road because it's just going to be pavement. It's going to be the road to the sidewalk and it's going to be someone else's house. And then it's going to be another building. And there's 15 meters, but that 15 meters touches the road. And that's the unfortunate part because it's supposed to be for the animals. And like, that's literally what I've went back in the area behind my bush, behind my house and in there, and you can see the deer tracks in there. Some of the assessments say that deer can't even go in there in the winter. There's plenty in there all the time. Like I hear coyotes chasing the deer in there. I've heard it this year. Like it's just certain things that I don't quite understand why the assessment says one thing and everyone that comes on here and the professionals say this, but like me seeing it firsthand is a completely different story. And I'm trying to get that point across to the council. I started a petition against this. I have, and I don't think that even matters, but there's been 575 people that have signed it wanting the green area. This area doesn't have any green area, so that's our only option. So like I've just been trying to fight for the last 2 weeks since I knew that this meeting was coming on, and I don't know how to get my message across. And I just wish that that was possible. Like I see the other side of it, and they're saying all the best words that they can, but in the end of it, if this continues to push along and they excavate all these lots, there's no going back. And I want to make sure that the right decision's made is kind of what I'm saying. And like, it's mainly for the animals, and there's so many animals in there. To the south of like our lots is that wetlands, and there's tons of animals that go back there that go travel right through this area. And I just want that to continue. So.
Okay, well, thank you for your comments, Mr. Smith. It is possible to get your point across. This is the place to do it. We're all here, and I'm grateful for your comments. And so if that's all, then thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I think we did receive your petition.
Yeah, I've sent everything in. So
got an email with it earlier. So I think we've been in receipt of all of your written comments. So thank you for those as well.
thanks.
Okay, so that's the end of the members of the public who are looking to present to council on this file. So I will ask members of the committee if there are questions or comments for clarification. We'll start with the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through your Mr. Sabat. I think this is a great project that you're putting forward. I know everybody worries about the green space. You're maintaining some green space, but you are building what is needed in this community. We need rental houses. We need housing, period. You're looking after the green space, and I think this will be a very good project. I think it'll be beneficial to Saugeen Shores, and I thank you for doing that.
Okay, further questions or comments from members? Councilor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, I do have a couple of additional questions. The first is just to confirm, because I know there was, I think, an initial announcement about this project indicated that, as Barbara indicated in her report, that this was R3 originally intended to be that, and I think that it's now a misunderstanding because it has been changed to R1, which means single family dwellings only. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody who's listening to this understands that that change has been recommended by staff. This is a question for our town staff. One of the comments in the report is that there will be public notification at the site planning stage. And I wondered how that will be done so that interested members of the public can be alert to how that would be, how that would have to be handled.
Jay Bosner.
Yeah, so from our perspective, the notification is that the council or public can provide comments now and throughout this process as we rezone, and that the, as you know, committee of the whole and council review site plans so that the public is notified as those agenda are posted to our website. Won't be a direct mail out. Our current process doesn't do direct mail out like this process does. It's as I described it.
And if interested members of the public, is there a way that, or is it appropriate for that to contact people who have have given you their email already, or is that something they're responsible for checking up on at this stage?
Well, at this stage, I'd encourage them to provide their comments directly to us so that we can see them. So if they have concerns, don't hold back is what I'd be recommending. Provide that comment directly to your council, of course, and to me or to Barbara, because we'll be considering these comments. And even if they're not directly attributed to the zoning, I'll be saving them and putting them in with the site plan so that we'll at least have to consider them, because you'll remind me, Councillor Grace, respectfully, I know that. So it's important that they share them throughout this process.
Could you, Jay, just tell us how members of the public can do that at this point?
Well, it's like best way is email. I still work at home. The lovely plant and wall sconce behind me is my dining room. So the best way is email. And I guess I don't mind sharing it publicly over the airwaves. It's j.posner@saugeenshores.ca. You can search me on the website as well, and my name's on a few different pages. So if you can't remember how to spell it, there it is.
Okay, very good.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple more questions.
Yep, carry on.
Mr. Morton spoke about the fences, and I was interested to hear the comments about the chain link fence and his suggestion of perhaps an option of rail fences. But I do have a question, because I think a couple of people in their comments mentioned a concern about the issue of standing ash trees that may be very close to the lot line of an existing property. And if those people did have their own fence or maybe, shed or something like that, will there be any assessment done if that, or is that something that would be handled through like a bylaw complaint? If somebody noticed a dead ash tree they were concerned about, they could contact our bylaw officer and ask for an assessment?
That's a good question. I wasn't prepared for that part. Ash trees have a very unique standard or policy in town, so I can't say specifically, but the site plan, and I'll defer to Amanda, she might be answered, but the site plan generally would require the landowner to enter into an agreement and agree to maintain the property in accordance with the agreement. If the EIS is recommending that dead and dying trees be integrated and allowed to rot, the acknowledgement of who needs to maintain that is in the agreement. I suggest there would be at least a clause to talk about unsafe or trees that might be damaging or threatening, neighboring property, human life. They would have to be addressed, and we would want to be notified through our normal channels, which is bylaw enforcement.
Thank you. I think that would be a good idea. I do have a couple more questions.
But about the ash tree, I just didn't, if Amanda had particular interest, that I couldn't add.
Sure.
Yep. If you don't mind, through you, Mr. Mayor,
Mhm.
I just add, there is a section of this piece that's unopened road allowance. And that piece, if there were ash trees on it, those requests come through the Public Works Department, and we go out and our arborist will assess that tree. And if it's a dangerous tree, then we would take it down because that's on our property. But when it's on the private property, then it's exactly as Jay was saying with that site plan agreement and would come by a complaint. And just because there's the two pieces, I just thought I'd highlight that we would take care of our property and ensure that there weren't unsafe trees there.
Okay, thank you. My next question is for either, I guess, Mr. Saba or Mr. Davidson. Do you have, I'm sure you must have some sense of how big would the average single family dwelling be on your lots?
Yes. If they're going to be rental, it's going to be elaborate. Like I don't like to put mansion in there, but it's going to be probably around regular house, maybe 1,800 square feet. And I have a lot of design I look at. I mean, where the 1,800 square feet, like if you put the hip roof, I could fit more room there. If somebody have bigger family or little bungalow, that thing I have to really think hard about it, but it's not going to be big. No, it's not going to be small either, like cottages, for example. It's going to be your regular neighborhood house. I would say, if you want to make a commit to number, probably between 1,500 to 2,000 max.
Okay. Thank you. I wasn't really asking for a commitment, just a sense. And I guess my final question is really a comment that a number of members of the public expressed concern that they found the initial notice that was mailed to them hard to decipher the actual diagram of the plan. And this is really for, I know county planning staff said, yes, well, you can always come into the office and take a look, or you could look online. But I found myself that the website, the county planning website, sometimes can be confusing, especially if you're not really familiar with how to navigate it. So this is just a future request that planning staff, please try to make sure that the diagrams that are being sent to the public are easy to read and understand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Sauer, for your presentation, and to the members of the public also, for comments that have been, sent in to staff and council. There were a lot of excellent comments, and I agree. One of my comments I'd written down, Councillor Grace, was follow up on your comment that I think there was a little bit of confusion at the beginning, Mr. Mayor, that I was reached out to by some members of the public out there, thought we were building apartment units, low cost housing rentals, and there was a lot of confusion in the beginning. I think the wording of the report too with the R3 was a little bit confusing to some people, and now I'm hearing 10 residential units, 7 and 3, and Jay Posner, it appears to me in the mapping that about 60% of the property roughly is not being developed, 40% developed. Is that about right? Close to that number?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done the scale, but Barbara may have more specific numbers, but it's probably a fair assessment. And perhaps on those sort of issues, I would defer to Barbara, Mr. Vice Deputy Mayor.
It looks to me the mapping looks that way. I think that looks like it's very close. The question, Copway Trail looks as though the road runs across the existing Copway Trail to north end, Mr. Savin, and that's an important linkage east to west down to Lake Huron for the residents up above and below. Will that trail be replaced and rebuilt to ensure that that the connecting link along Copway Street will still exist?
Mr. Saba?
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, well, yeah, if you have an answer or one of.
No, the Copway is still going to be exist. I mean, my road is just off to it and curved inside to my land.
Yeah, I just see the existing Copway Trail. The road seems to run over the existing trail. That's all. My question was really, that trail will still exist running east-west?
I hope so.
Ms. Swanson looks like she has a comment. Ms. Swanson?
Yes, the intent is that we're going to put a sidewalk where the road is going to cross over, so the development is not going to impede the pedestrian traffic. Where we'll put a sidewalk parallel to the road and to allow them to be able to cross over to connect to the trail.
That was my question. I appreciate it. It's an important linkage. And Peter, single family dwellings, 10 units, no secondary dwelling suites, correct? There will not be secondary dwelling suites as part of this development?
You mean second dwelling on the same lot?
Yes, secondary dwelling suites, strictly single family residential?
No, I'm not going to do that.
Okay. That's all, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
No, like honestly, from day one, I want something to complement the neighborhood. It's going to be like, when I saw the lot, 33 lot, complementing the Ottawa street. So if I can't build 33 lot, I mean, fine. This is a third, 10 lot out of the 33 lot. So I still want it to complement the neighborhood. So it's going to be really complementing the neighborhood the same. No another, like, I don't want to do the house with the in-law suite or base. It's not going to be even basement. Just a regular nice house. It even like, it's not a good venture for me because it costs lot of money to service these 10 lots. But I'm desperate for rental. Like, I want my tenant in the plaza to have a stable business and stable living, and hopefully it helped a little bit the town too.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Saba. Are there further questions or comments from members? Councillor Mayat.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, I think maybe Peter just answered it. And Peter, welcome. It's nice to see you. And I'm certain that these will be nice homes. I've seen your buildings in town already, and they are of the highest quality. My question is, when we get into an area that is on or adjacent to wetlands, and as you get closer to the lake, groundwater becomes an issue. Do you anticipate you'd be building these on grade, or would you put basements underneath of them?
Okay, right now, no, I am not thinking for basement. I think the water table is quite high, and it's no use for me to put a basement really, because it's going to affect the underground water. So hopefully I could have, like, I'm going to put a floating foundation, what you call, and it's hopefully I do it as careful as I can, you know, and but no basement to answer the question.
All right, that's probably good, because you're always going to have pumps and you're going to maybe disrupt the ground flow and all that. So that's good. And in as much as there are concerns from neighbors, which is expected in something like this, like I said, I believe that these will be of the highest quality, and they will fit the character of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Yes. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you very much. I don't like to build cheap looking or cheap structure or anything like that. Sometimes it's better to spend a little bit money and less headache at the end of the day.
All right, thank you. Are there further comments from members of the committee? I just, for myself, and maybe this is a question directed best at the Director of Infrastructure and Development, I just look at these private roads. So on the north end, you know, we have a private road that's on municipality's road allowance for a stretch, but I don't know if it's built to urban standard up at that point or how it looks narrow, but I don't know. And then it extends down on private land because it's privately owned, parallel to the town's road allowance. And then that happens at the south end as well. And I just wonder about the orderly development of this part of the community and how that impacts the rest of that parcel. I mean, the whole parcel is zone plan development. I don't know what the future holds for the triangular piece that goes along the county road there, but it is zone plan development. And we have a road allowance. And so I just wonder, you know, could we get some comments about the impact that this has on a long planned and a piece of property that was divided up intentionally and now we seem to be doing something different that doesn't like it looks odd when I look at the map, and it looks like the municipality's interests in orderly development might be impacted by this. So maybe somebody could speak to it and give me some reassurance. Maybe I'll see if the director has some comments, and then maybe I'll take you, Ron. I see you came on there. So the director.
Sure. Thank you. And through you, I probably will defer to Ron for when it comes to the planning pieces, but infrastructure wise, I could see that triangle being able to do something as a cluster site plan as well. It would need the same EIS instead of having it single lotted along our road there. But just because Mr. Saba's put the private lane in on his land wouldn't preclude that way of developing that triangular piece across the road. So that developer could still come in and we could build that road in that unopened road allowance. But these were planned in the day long before the EIS and those sorts of things were required. So I'm comfortable with the private road being what's appropriate for Peter's development, and then the piece that's in our road allowance will be built to our standard, and we'll have agreements and determine how to make it work for snow clearing and garbage collection up to the private road
And
piece.
so one other question follow up before I go to Ron, Amanda. Is it the intention that piece of road allowance, a piece of road, private road that's on the road allowance will actually be a public road? Will it be private or public when it's on our road allowance? Are we talking about divesting ourselves of the road allowance or retaining it?
We haven't opened, we haven't opened that part of the discussion yet to be finalized. That would still come through with the site plan piece as to what's going to happen there. So either part of that agreement will be the maintenance, or we would have to come back, deem it surplus, sell it for it to become private. But then we would also need to maintain that trail on it as well. So, but you'll see that as part of the site plan agreement, that decision.
Mr. Davidson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, actually, I have a bit of experience with that other property. There's not much development potential there. There has been an environmental impact study done, and if memory serves me correct, that one lot now that is rather large, I think at most maybe could get one more lot out of it. There was discussions since Peter bought the property. I actually tracked down the guy, or tried to track him down. I think I did. About the idea of actually opening up that road, because Peter's first thought was to, or Laura's perhaps, or all of ours, was to, rather than have that that little private road coming in off of the highway at the south end to hit sites 1, 2, and 3, actually have it go on the road allowance, actually open it up as a road allowance. But that would only work if the guy to the north was interested, because it's rather expensive to open up a road allowance to full municipal standards. And there was no interest. So as Amanda said, I guess if there's ever interest in from that guy in creating perhaps one more lot, he would have to approach the town and do that. But like I said, there has been involvement there through me. There has been an environmental impact study done, and there's really not much development potential at all. Like I said, at most one more lot.
Okay, those were my questions. And if there aren't any others, then I'll just conclude the public meeting by reminding all members of the public who are watching here this evening that, of course, council will not be making a decision on this file this evening. Our staff will be taking your comments, both delivered in person this evening and received in writing, and working with the proponent and putting together a recommendation for council, which will come at a subsequent meeting at a later date. So, and you can, of course, continue to submit comments or questions about the file. Mr. Posner gave his contact information earlier, and you can send those comments if you wish to him. So that concludes our public meeting on this file, and we'll move on then to the next one. I'm sorry, I'm just going to do it back in my agenda. So that moves on to 4.2, which is S 2021-002, Snyder Development Corp. For a draft plan of subdivision, and we'll turn it over to the planner, Daniel Kingsbury.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, members of committee. I will just share my screen here. Okay, good. So this is an application for a plan of subdivision. And originally this was a part of the Lord Elgin Development, Elgin Estates Development Limited, or Lidl Woodlands application that dates back to the mid 2000s. So there was a sort of a comprehensive planning exercise at that point in the mid 2000s there we go. Okay, excellent. So this was considered phase 3 of that development. Phases 1A and B and 2 have subsequently been built out, consisting of 77 lots, and the third phase was draft approved with a lapse date of August 19th, 2020. And under the Planning Act, when a subdivision lapses, the draft approval lapses, there's no recourse to regain that draft status. So the applicant then has to apply for a plan of subdivision if there's an intent to develop those lands, and that is what happened here. The plan inadvertently lapsed in the summer 2020, and so this is a plan of subdivision, largely consistent with phase 3 of the former plan for the Woodlands subdivision here. So I'll just bring you through some of the some context. The uses on the site and surrounding the site are residential and environmental. It's serviced and can be serviced by municipal water and sewer, and has year-round access on Acton Drive. What is proposed, you'll see shortly, is an extension of Acton Drive right through that blue hatched area on the screen to concession 10. And there's a picture of the road stub for Acton Drive under construction. So the proposal is for a 10.65 hectare parcel consisting of 50 single detached lots. There's 2 walkway blocks for trail connectivity, 4 enlargement blocks for neighboring properties that already exist on Fenton Drive, and a number of utility blocks as well. So the proposals single loaded on the would be the west side of Acton Drive for for approximately 2/3 heading north, and then double loaded on the side east and west sides of the proposed Acton extension. So just want to sort of confirm the plan's largely the same in terms of number of dwellings or number of lots proposed. The number of dwellings, dwelling units, however, is proposed to be 55, and that's because the applicant has indicated an interest in constructing 5 of the units with secondary suites within them to address affordable housing issues in the town. Also would like to point out that there's been some slight modification to the tree retention plan, as we'll get to later on in the proposal, and a narrowing of Acton Road, or Acton Drive, I should say, and a shifting of the interceptor ditch, which runs south to north on the east side of the Acton Drive extension. And this shifting around of tree preservation blocks and stormwater management infrastructure allows the lot sizes to be slightly larger to accommodate to better accommodate the building footprint. So that's a slight modification, and there's no, I guess, other notable modification would be there's no connection to Cutter Drive proposed in this version of the draft plan, whereas the previously draft approved version had Cutter Drive, a Cutter Drive extension into the draft plan. So just in terms of the planning context, that planning exercise that occurred in the mid-2000s established a principle of use on the lands as residential. So the lands are designated residential. However, they have what's considered an overlay on them. So the residential designation is sort of the underlying designation, but overlaid on top of that is a special policy area 4. And special policy area 4 encompasses the woodland feature between Port Elgin and Southampton largely, and has special policies that recognize the unique natural heritage features within that policy area, and does allow limited development within pockets that are suitable for development. And likewise, the lands were zoned at that time. So again, the official plan designation and the zoning are permissive of residential development. The R1 special 48 provision is the existing zoning on the land. There's no change to that. The holding provision and it really special provision just outlines some regulations that the development would be subject to prior to removal of the holding. Otherwise, the R1 provisions remain the same for those lands. So single detached would be the permitted building or dwelling type. And the holding provision is can be removed subject to a site plan agreement that addresses tree retention and building envelopes, and servicing has been completed to the satisfaction of the town. So I'll just go through some of the planning considerations with this proposal, starting with the efficient use of land and infrastructure. So to this extent, the county, both the county and town official plan, as well as the provincial policy, direct large scale developments such as this subdivision proposal to be on service lands within an urban area. So in this case, Port Elgin. And the county official plan also establishes a minimum density target to help achieve this efficiency in the use of land. In this regard, phase 3 in its own context does not meet the threshold of 15 units per hectare. However, note briefly that, as I mentioned before, the lands were part of a broader planning exercise from the mid-2000s that encompassed not only phases 1A, B, 2, and 3 of this subdivision, but the other legal lands on the table lands, so the lands above the former glacial Lake Nipissing shoreline, were part of that planning exercise. And a lot of the density seen in or that otherwise would have been directed to this subdivision was shifted towards high density and medium density residential blocks in that Lidl subdivision that's currently being built out closer to the highway there. So the second issue that we have received quite a few comments on is stormwater management. I understand the applicant's engineering consultant from Cobide Engineering, Steve Cobine, is on the line to sort of confirm the details here. But this was a fairly common public comment, especially for residents who live west of the proposed subdivision. And flooding is common, drainage issues are common, and that's largely due to the topography of the land. So lands generally drain east to west, down the tablelands, from the tablelands, down the bluff into an area that's characterized by pockets of wetland and uneven topography that makes stormwater management challenging. So what's proposed through this subdivision, through this proposal, is the construction of an interceptor ditch that runs, and you'll see this on the screen, it's indicated in blue, is the proposed interceptor ditch, runs south to north on the east side, and this would capture a lot of that runoff from the bluff, and direct it to discharge points, sort of existing and proposed culverts, and these are the red circles for discharge into Lake Huron in a more controlled way than currently exists right now. And just highlight that the infrastructure has been designed to accommodate a 1 in 100 year flood event. So moving on to natural heritage. So I noted the lands are within the Special Policy Area 4, which recognizes this area of the town contains significant woodlands, wildlife habitat, fish habitat, and species of conservation concerns. It's also marked by hazardous conditions such as high groundwater conditions and complex drainage. However, the special policy area does also recognize that residential development can be permitted in specific and limited locations that avoid hazardous and ecologically sensitive areas. So there was an EIS conducted in 2008 through the former application for draft plan approval. The SVC has reviewed the EIS and is largely satisfied for draft approval purposes. It provides a sufficient amount of detail into the ecological nature of the area. So just to confirm, the environmental review study, as it's called, indicates the lands contain locally significant wetlands, a significant woodland, and significant wildlife habitat. So there's specific policies in the PPS that need to be addressed in county and town official plan, for that matter, prior to development, adjacent to these and within these significant features. Most notably, there's a test that no negative impacts or harm to the function or feature occur through development. So the environmental report that's been submitted to date largely confirms that. However, the SVCA would like to see the study updated. Typically, an EIS or an environmental study has about a 5-year shelf life. So as I indicated, it's probably sufficient for draft approval purposes, but prior to actual development, that study will need to be updated in accordance with the SVCA's terms, and that can be and would most likely be incorporated through a draft condition the SVCA is requesting. So what I'm showing here on the screen is the tree retention plan that meets the that shows how that 30% retention is to be implemented, and it's largely through it's perhaps difficult to see on the screen, but there's gray hatched marking at the rear of each of the 50 lots with a tree retention area ranging in size from about 20 to 40 meters in depth at the rear of each lot. So another common public comment received through the planning process was the impact to trails and concerns regarding the future of trails. So this is, I believe, the most updated trails plan received by the applicant, and what they're showing is integration of the of proposed trail within the Acton Drive corridor with the existing network that surrounds the land and those environmental lands to the east, and trail connectivity towards the Lakeshore and North Shore Road through certain access points. So that just sort of note that that the type of trail within the Acton Drive corridor has not been finalized by town staff. So this is conceptual at this point. I'm not sure the surface area or width of the trail for that matter, but my understanding is it's meant to accommodate a range of active transportation uses. Before moving on to sort of the next section, I'll just go through the land use compatibility consideration. And I noted there are 50 single detached houses. This is largely consistent with the makeup, housing makeup and lot fabric of the surrounding area, which is characterized by single detached houses. And as noted, there's a tree preservation plan to help buffer, I suppose, those impacts with adjacent lands and preserve the ecological function of the lands. Almost finally, we're at the affordable and attainable housing consideration. The applicant acknowledges that the housing that's proposed to be developed through this application likely doesn't meet the affordable the definition of affordable. However, he is proposing 5 secondary suites to be incorporated into and built into the product or the houses, I should say. So about 10% of the units would contain a secondary suite, which is new to both the developer and somewhat new to both the county and town staff, is how to sort of implement or facilitate this type of consideration. And finally, sewer and water services, it's proposed that the subdivision would be on full municipal services. So just moving on to some of the agency comments that we've received. The historic Saugeen Métis do have concerns regarding the impacts to the existing trail system, and also the date of the environmental review study, and also have noted an interest in the archaeological any archaeological artifacts that may be uncovered through development. Likewise, Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority has indicated they are acceptable of the development in principle. However, prior to or through the draft approval process, that a number of conditions related to natural heritage and natural hazards be included in the draft plan conditions, so that prior to final development or final approval, I should say, these conditions would have to be satisfied and cleared by the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority. And we have received quite a few public comments on this application. I know there's quite a few people interested in speaking, so I won't summarize exactly what has been submitted, but I'll sort of note many of the concerns were related to stormwater and drainage impacts, natural heritage impacts, trails, the date of the studies in support of the applications, and clarification is being sought regarding servicing and road improvements to adjacent lands, most notably Cutter Road. So just as a recap, this is a public meeting. The recommendation is that the application be received for information, and we will come back to committee with a report regarding the comments received at the recommendation, at the public meeting, with a recommendation regarding the application at a subsequent meeting. So I'll just conclude by saying I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. We'll come to that at the end. First, we'll move to the public portion of the meeting, and we'll start by hearing from the applicant and or the agent of the applicant. So we have Ron Davidson, Steve Cobain, and Brian Snyder all with us this evening. So we'll bring those folks in together and hear from them together, and maybe we'll start with you, Mr. Davidson.
Yes, thank you once again, Mr. Mayor, members of council. So for those who just joined, my name is Ron Davidson. I'm a planner, just like Dan, except I, in this case, am working for Brian Snyder, who owns the property. I believe Brian's on the line. He doesn't plan on saying anything, but if there are questions to be answered, hopefully he can answer them. Steve Cobain, the engineer who put together the subdivision, he's also on the line. He also will not be doing the presentation, but again, I'm sure there'll be questions that he can answer. He knows a little bit more about the trail system than I do, if that's going to become a question that's asked a lot. I'm going to be very brief here. As you heard from Dan, this was part of a plan of subdivision that was approved a long time ago. Part of that plan of subdivision, the other part, was not only given draft approval, but given final approval, registered. And there are some land or some houses on those properties, pardon me. But what we're left with is this parcel that was, it continued to get draft approval over the years, but there was an error made or a misunderstanding as to when the lapsing date was, and it lapsed recently, like in the last 6 to 8 months. For anybody that knows anything about plan of subdivision, they know that was a very big error, because you essentially have to start from scratch. And here we are basically starting from scratch. As you heard from Dan, we're essentially putting the same development back on, just a few minor tweaks. It's basically the same size of lots, the same density. You did hear Dan talk about 5 of the units having a secondary dwelling unit, which is another word for an apartment, or in the basement or upstairs. And that's something that Brian Snyder has agreed to. That wasn't his idea, but Brian was made to understand, or it was explained to him that how important achieving healthier densities are in Bruce County, and of course the knowledge that there's always a need for more affordable rental housing in Saugeen Shores. So he has agreed to put in 5 of the homes, put in a second dwelling unit. That's essentially all I want to, what I really want to say. Yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So nothing more from Mr. Snyder or Mr. Cobain, I guess. Then we'll, if not, then I assume you gentlemen stay on the line, and if there's questions for you, then you'll be there to answer them. But in the meantime, we'll go to other members of the public, and we have 2 here who have asked to speak to council this evening, and the first one is Wayne Kaufman. Mr. Kaufman. Are you there, Mr. Kaufman?
I'm here. Oh, there now. I can hear someone. Let me turn my video on.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your presentation, gentlemen. I had a few questions. We're in favor of the subdivision, but we'd like to get a few things clarified. My first question is block 63. It's between lots 13 and 15. What's the purpose of that block? Other than to, where does that ownership of that block go to?
And maybe ask Mr. Davidson, potentially the planner.
It kind of cuts into Cutter Road. I just don't understand what the purpose of that block is.
Yeah, I'm sure we can get an answer to that.
Yeah,
Who wants to take it?
Mr. Mayor, if I can just have Steve answer that, that would be my preference.
Sure, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Block 63, that was just a remnant kind of block. I believe it's from the old plan, actually. That was just going to be transferred over to the municipality. So there's no intentions of developing that block. It was just the way the lots were originally configured. That block was, again, a remnant block. And that's about as much as I know about it, too. It's just a duplication from the original draft plan of subdivision. But yeah, the intentions would be to transfer it over to the municipality.
What it looks like, it opens up Cutter Road to be opened. That's my concern.
Yeah, and that's not the intentions.
Okay. My next question was, we really like the idea of green space. We've lived here for 40 years, and behind my house, between me and the planned subdivision, is a swamp. And if you can say that everybody has to have a green space at the back of their lot, but they're not going to maintain a swamp there. And the only way to get rid of a swamp is to drain it and then to fill it with dirt. So I'm concerned that once that's done on that property, the water has to flow towards the lake again, and my lot's now lower than the new lots that are going to be behind me, and water runs downhill. So we need to address the water off the property, not just the roads, but also the properties that are going to be adjacent to our property. So, and again, green space is great, but you can't grow trees in a swamp, unfortunately. And how do you maintain, who's going to maintain that green space? Is that green space going to be, if the developer comes in and clear cuts the trees and you slap them on the wrist and say, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that, we'll replant. Well, it takes 40 years for a tree to grow. So that's my concern with the green space.
Would you like somebody to address that?
Well, I'm not sure we have to, Mr. Mayor, at this time. I'm raising these questions so that when I suppose we're going to have another meeting, and then people can come back with recommendations to what our questions are.
Yeah, certainly this will come back before council, and your comments will be taken into account for sure. But so carry on. Yep.
Okay. I read in the proposal that at the north end of the development, sewage pumping is going to be required. And the way I read it is each individual house is going to have to pump their sewage uphill. Is that a true statement?
Mr. Cobain.
Thank you again. It's true that as you get past, there's a break point. The sanitary sewer is coming up from the south end of Acton Drive where it's been stubbed back in, I guess that was 2011-12 that we constructed Acton Drive to where it is today. It's got a length that can only go to provide this subdivision gravity sewer drainage, and it's in and around where I've got lot 50 shown on the draft plan. From that point north towards concession 10, the property does fall towards the north towards concession 10. We can't extend the sewer any further from there, otherwise it'll be coming out of the ground. So it's probably about the last 25 lots will have to be pumped somehow. And it was originally discussed and even back in 2008, 2009 at the time. We did go through different servicing options. So the options and then with the lapsing of the draft plan and going through it with town staff again, the options for those last 25 lots, there's a variety of options. One would be you could have individual grinder pumping station. The one that the developer prefers is a centralized pumping station, and we do have a block at the north end of the subdivision in behind 37 right now, just reserved for a pumping station. We have had discussions with the town though, whether your lots on Cutter Road would be party to this or not. For now, we want to get our draft plan in and then work at the servicing arrangements for these last 25 lots once we get into a final engineering stage. So yes, the last 25 lots will need to be pumped somehow into the gravity sewer that will end approximately lot 50, lot 25.
Thanks, Steve. You led right into my next question. Provisioning for Cutter Road for sewage for the existing properties all the way, well, actually all the way along the North Shore Road and Cutter Road. Will there be provisions for access for those lots to be connected to the municipal sewer system?
There's nothing final about whether or not the Cutter Road residents would be part of that. Again, there were some preliminary discussions about it and how that would work and where a pumping station would go. Obviously, Cutter Road's a little bit lower than Acton Drive, so we would, if we're looking at a big picture, there'd be a pumping station probably somewhere on Cutter Road if it would work. We can't drain uphill. So that's basically where those discussions went to. But I guess if you were interested in getting sewer service, you'd have to ask the town, I guess, and then like I said, as part of our final design, I think the developer has shown some interest in it, but just for us to get the draft plan going again, we just thought we'll service it ourselves, and that's similar to how it was left last time when we went through this in 2008, 2009. But it definitely is potential opportunity.
Thanks. Cutter Road is definitely a concern. I'm not so much concerned about getting connected to the sewer for myself. I'm concerned about my children and my children's children in Lake Huron, because septic systems leach, they're a leaching bed, and we need to stop using them. We need to protect our resources. That's why I'd like sewers. My last question is actually on Cutter Road. We have a very unsafe environment at the end of Cutter Road right now. Every time we get mail delivery, which is on a daily basis, the mail truck has to turn around in one of our driveways. We have children playing on the street. It's a dead end. We'd like to get Cutter Road to be made a much safer and user-friendly road. The other problem we have is service vehicles, the dump truck, garbage trucks. They try to turn around in the driveways. They don't know where the culverts are. They fall into the ditch. They crush our culverts, so it leads to water problems. We'd really like to see Cutter Road make a proper turnaround. There's lots of property there. The town has 2 blocks on either side. There's lots of room for a proper turnaround for service vehicles and the general public to turn around, because it is a dead end at the end of the pavement. So if we could address those concerns, we're all for it, guys.
Okay.
Thanks for your presentation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Thank you for your comment. All right. Thank you. So that moves us then on to our second member of the public who wishes to speak, and that's Susan Dunlop. Ms. Dunlop. There she is. Yep, you're on mute there, Susan.
Thank you. My concern with this development is the drainage of the land behind us as it affects my property, 84 North Shore Road. We have had issues at various times in the past with water coming onto our property from the bush behind us. As recently as February in 2019, there was significant water running from the bush, which caused water to surround our foundation. It ran down our driveway. One of the lanes actually on North Shore Road had to be closed. My neighbor had water in her basement, which caused significant damage. At that time, I spoke to Steve Cobain, who suggested putting a drainage ditch in the access lane behind our property, which the town did. I spoke with Steve Cobain again at the beginning of June this year to determine the drainage plan for this new proposed development. He told me that the ditch in the access lane behind us is part of the drainage plan that his company developed, but I was surprised I didn't see it on Mr. Kingsbury's screen. So I'm confused, I guess, about that. Anyway, he thought that the town would be responsible for its maintenance, but he wasn't certain. I also spoke with Mr. Kingsbury, and it was his opinion that the town would be responsible for the maintenance of the drainage ditches. Well, the drainage ditch that was dug in 2019 has not been maintained, and that area is now getting filled with Phragmites. As you know, Phragmites is terribly invasive, and the concern is that it will clog the drainage ditch and render it useless. In an email and in a phone conversation with me, Jay Posner stated that the town is responsible for maintaining the Phragmites. He would not say that the town was responsible for the continued regular maintenance of the entire ditch, like from erosion, other vegetation, and so on. So I guess in conclusion, I've not been told for certain who is to maintain the open drainage ditches in the proposal. My concern is that if approval for the development of the subdivision is given before determination of the responsibility for the continued maintenance of the drainage ditches in the plan, it may not be maintained and the drainage plan will not be effective, thereby placing our property in danger of flooding once again.
Well, maybe we can get an answer to that question here now. There's the director. Amanda, can you answer Ms. Dunlop's question about responsibility for maintaining the ditch?
Sure, through you, Mr. Mayor. Drainage ditches that are within our right-of-way are our responsibility and are maintained by the Public Works crews. So we do inspections of these ditches annually, and when maintenance is required, they're needed, or when they come through as reported concerns or calls into the town office, we do go out, investigate, and then maintain.
So just to be clear, this interceptor ditch that's proposed here will be, is in the town's right of way and will be maintained by the town?
That is correct. There's an interceptor ditch shown on Acton Drive, and there's an interceptor ditch shown on that unopened road allowance. That's the extension of Cutter Road, and both of those will be maintained by the town.
Okay, is that clear enough, Ms. Dunlop?
Yes, thank you very much.
All right, very good. Thank you for your comments. Okay, so that's the final member of the public who asked to address us this evening. So we'll turn it over to members of the committee, and we'll start with the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your presentation, Steve and Ron, and Wayne Kaufman mentioned earlier about the, I've had several discussions, many discussions with Cutter Road residents over the years. And I guess the question for you, Steve, perhaps Amanda, about this interceptor ditch. They've had some issues on Cutter Road with their groundwater. They've had a couple of them had flooded basements over the years, and there's claims that since the development happened above the bluffs over the years, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, that the problems worsened. And is it fair to say, Steve, I don't know whether Amanda answers this, but is it fair to say that Cutter Road maybe, there's help it's on its way in terms of, dealing with maybe surface water perhaps could be almost eliminated, and I know the groundwater, the lake levels are high and so on and so forth, but is it going to help their situation once and for all here, Amanda? Do you think this could have a good result here for Cutter Road residents?
through you, Mr. Mayor, I will answer and invite Steve to add as well. But this development is going to control the surface water and the groundwater upstream and on their lots, so they can help in that way, that they're not going to be contributing to groundwater issues from that area. But there's going to be no effect on the lake level impact. So what is happening on Cutter Road due to higher lake levels and increased rainfall intensities, that stuff will still happen in those areas. But the interceptor ditch is intended to take the drainage from this subdivision surface water and direct it away from the Cutter Road residences. Steve, do you want to add to that?
And I can give you a brief description of what we're planning for stormwater management for the rest of the Woodlands subdivision. The concept was derived back in 2008. Numerous hydrogeological studies have been done in the Woodlands area and the large portion east of the future Acton Drive road allowance. That bush area acts as a big sponge. Once that sponge gets saturated, it releases the water. So we've done, and we just went back in there last fall, did some more geotechnical investigation, and basically our hydrogeologists came back and said it's basically the first between 6 to 10 feet of the subsurface soils there. They're sand, and they overlie a clay till, which is like a very hard packed clay. So the water just comes off from the bush and just keeps trucking west, because that's the natural lay of the land, towards North Shore Road and Cutter Lane or Cutter Road. So that first 6 to 10 feet of water, it's just traveling through the sand really quickly, and once you get a lot of water in the fall or the spring, it's just going to come up to the surface and keep making its way to the west. So the diversion ditch is designed to cut that flow off to the downstream residents downstream or to the west of Acton Drive. So there's a bunch of redundancies built into this system. The first one is, and we've already started the diversion ditch. It is on Fenton Drive as we speak, and it's the large ditch on the east side. And it stops right where we ended the pavement on Acton. So the proposal is to extend that diversion ditch up to about, it's basically the first 15 lots, the lot 15. The lay of the land starts going the other direction towards concession 10. So that diversion ditch will be extended up as part of the next phase. And all that water is going to collect the water coming out of the bush, direct it to the storm sewer system that's just east or west of Bushwood Lane. And that pipe, that whole infrastructure was installed back in 2012 and has been designed to accommodate that water. And from that point, lot 15 north, the ditch will be extended towards concession 10 and be connected into the large storm sewer system on concession 10, which was designed to accommodate that water as well. So there's the ditch does extend north from lot 16, and it diverts around where we start having lots on both sides of Acton Drive at the north end. That's lot 50, and then it goes in behind those lots. So essentially, it's designed to intersect that top 6 to 8 feet of saturated water. We won't get it all, because we won't get it down to 10 feet deep, and because that'd be fairly deep. We are limited to how deep we can go with it. But the second line of defense, I guess I'll call it, is we do put perforated storm sewers in under all the roads in the woodlands, so that helps to dry up the water as well under the road. That also helps keep the roads, so they don't start breaking up in the spring times. Just controls the water underneath or controls the groundwater underneath the road. Third level of defense is the road is actually designed as a channel in itself, where it's got a curb and gutter. So if there's any ever chance of the water jumping the interceptor ditch, it would flow onto Acton Drive, and either directed to the south down to Bushwood Lane or to the north to concession 10. And then we've got the houses built up on the west side of Acton Drive too. So that's another line of defense, as I call it. So anyway, hopefully that answers your question.
Seems to me, maybe there's a little help on the way for Cutter Road. I'm not an engineer, but I'm hearing there may be some help on the way. A few other questions, actually. I've had Mr. Kaufman actually sent me in this note, just asked about if any further development in this area. I think Jay or Amanda could answer this perhaps, but I think this is it for that particular area of town, Jay, for development. There's nothing more to the east in the Beaners, obviously. There's no more lands to be developed in this area, correct?
Correct. The land that's designated for shoreline residential or residential is confined. East of this land is actually owned by the town right now. So we own the majority of the woodland feature.
That's fine, Jay. And Amanda, just to you, Mr. Mayor again, Amanda, is this a good opportune time for Cutter Road residents, for the town to be thinking about? We heard about pumping station, and you got to pump it. It doesn't, for gravity fed, you got to pump it. Obviously it's downhill in Cutter Road and going uphill rather for sanitary. Is this a good idea for the town with Acton Drive being developed potentially here, that in the future we could eventually look at Cutter Road for sanitary?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, this is the time to look at it for sure. Knowing that the residents that would be contributing to this outside the development would be paying for their portion of that work. Now exactly would be the time where they could get a better price because some of the infrastructure would be needed. So any oversizing or making things deeper and things that directly contributed to their lots would be at their cost, and wouldn't cost the developer anything more to do it. So yeah, now we would look at this area and see what we can do for sanitary.
That's good to hear for the residents in that area. Mr. Mayor, my last question is to you, to Brian. Brian, if you don't mind chiming in on this, this is really important for the residents in the area, for the community at large, and that's the blue trail that runs from the pumping station in a westerly direction towards Lake Huron. A lot of people use that trail in the wintertime, not so much summer. It's very wet, obviously. But could you just outline, for the benefit of council and the members of the public, what exactly is being planned in your plan of subdivision for trail development? And could you give us a sneak preview of what you're thinking about there? Yeah.
Yep, you're still muted there. All right. There you go.
Is that okay?
Yep, we got you.
Yeah, so we've been working on this trail plan for a little bit now. I think we want to, create a trail that goes from Acton, like all along Acton, and up and behind the lots on lot 50 to follow the interceptor ditch, connecting up to a trail that Brad Pride and myself are working on, that's going from the existing pumping station halfway up 10th concession, running west along just inside the property line of the forest there, all the way down to where the lots start. So parallel to the 10th.
Okay.
And then we're going to actually add, potentially, if you're interested, a piece that goes from that lot, I think it's 37, west along the 10th and maybe down to Cutter. And I think that would kind of complete that section.
Well, so Brian, thanks for that. I've had numerous people talk to me about the trail system there, that what are they losing, what are they gaining, and it holds a special place with people. For the trail system through there is an amazing trail system, and I think what you're proposing is just going to make it so much better. So that linkage to Cutter Road and your subdivision and into Acton and up to the pumping station, that's going to be a great loop if we make that happen, and that's something I certainly in the community would like to see happen. So thanks for that, Brian.
Yeah, there's a lot of people I find walk up the 10th, and you're driving by them and you're pulling into the other lane to get around people. And I think Brad's got a good idea there about trying to, get some kind of a parallel laneway going up the 10th that people can use as a walking path instead of having to walk on the road.
Thanks again, Brian. Mr. Mayor, it's a terrific proposal for the trail system in particular. So thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome. Thanks, Mike.
All right. I think I saw Councillor Carr and then Councillor Grace. You're still muted there, Matt.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor. I guess just a couple of points I want to clarify. First, we talked about the previous site plan or subdivision agreement that's lapsed. Are we still looking at the same amount of lots being created here? And if we are, what was the reason with the change, I guess, in the alignment from Cutter to, I guess, where it's going to come up and behind Cutter now? I guess maybe more in line with the new Lakeside Estates, whatever it is down there. I guess that would be my first question.
Sure. Who wants to take that?
Steve?
Steven? All right.
Sure. Yeah, the proposal was more or less the same number of lots along there. And back when we originally did this in 2008, there was concern from the Cutter Road residents not to have a connection there. There was a connection there. We did get rid of it this time. But the intersection was always where it's shown right now is where it was always proposed. And it lines up across the street to Lakeside Woods. So it works well there.
Okay, I guess next when we're talking about the drainage points. So if we're going to put that interceptor ditch in, I'm looking, I guess, specifically at the part where we'd be going in between lots 21 and 22. Is that stuff, I'm using that as an example because I know definitely beside Hilly Lane there, we have issues there constantly. Is that something that you would be looking at dumping more water in there? I know we're controlling what's going to be going in, but is that something that's going to be requiring upgrades to specifically that ditch that I'm referring to now?
Steve?
Yep, thank you. No, we're not going west towards Hilly Lane. As we go north on Acton Drive, the ditch actually goes to the east in behind lots 50 all the way up to 37 and 10th concession, and will connect into the existing storm sewer system on the 10th concession. So there's no water being directed towards Hilly Lane as part of this development.
Okay, sorry. So I must have misunderstood that because I thought, I guess from the way I understood from what you had said earlier was we would be doing, I guess, the gravity septic or sewer system up till, I'm sorry, I can't remember. I didn't jot down what lot it was that you had mentioned. It was going to stop. Sorry.
It was lot 50 that for this.
At lot 50, and we have to look at going to a force main on the other side. So anything that would be collected there would be going into the town sewer system. It wouldn't be going, I guess, like I understand that ditch is going to be on the east side of the road, but there's still going to be stuff that's going to have to be drained out. So we won't be adding any extra to any of the drains that are currently there to the west side of the road.
That's correct.
Okay. I guess, and then the last question might be more towards Amanda then. I guess if we do have to look at the force main or whatever might have to happen, pumps, whatever's going to have to happen for those lots closer to the 10th, is that something that our infrastructure is ready for there? I know we have issues ongoing on that 10th, it seems, with some of that force main already. Is that where this would be tied in? Does that take a different route? Or I guess I'm just curious if that's going to have any effect on some of the issues we've been having along there.
That through you, Mr. Mayor, that stuff will get worked out through the detailed design. You can look at the catchment areas when we talk about the water wastewater master plan in our next presentation as well when it comes to the catchment areas and that. Yeah, the concession 10 force main issues have just been unique every time we get them. There's been failed couplers and different pieces, so it's almost coincidental as they're going up the line, but we're planning for that. This could go to concession 10, and if we're looking at bringing in the Cutter Road pieces, and if we were even to look at the Lakeside Wood and do a bigger master plan piece, then we would look at what that means. But I think in this intention here, the pump station for these 25 lots would come back down to the end of Acton, and that would go down towards the Harbor Street pump station instead. So it depends on how many lots we bring in effectively to decide which way we go. And if we go to concession 10, it would require a study on how that pump station would accommodate those flows.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Both of my questions are for staff. The first question is, this is a resident who wrote in, was concerned about a fire lane that many people use to access the existing trail. And the question is, how will this be affected and what access points to the trail will be available after construction?
Who wants to take that one?
I'll start, Mr. Mayor, or Dan, would you like to start with the trail connection through there?
Yeah, I can take a stab at it and maybe defer to Steve Cobean if he's more knowledgeable, but I think this question may be in reference to Hilly Lane. And from what I understand, a trail connection is proposed through there that would double as emergency access in the event that access is required. And that access would be controlled by, likely by knockdown bollards. So these bollards would be able to be knocked down by emergency vehicles in the event they have to be, but that corridor would otherwise be used as a trail. I believe there's one other trail connection along the subdivision through Acton Drive to the lakeshore. So a total of 2 trail connections. And Steve, feel free to jump in if you have more sort of working knowledge of the trail plan as it's evolved in the last few weeks, I suppose.
Sure, I can jump in now if you want, Dan.
Yep.
Okay. So we did have a meeting with Parks and Recreation staff, just to talk about the trails, how to enhance them, what opportunities exist there. And as Brian had said previously too, we are looking at, it was discussed, nothing's firm up, but taking we've got the main trail on the east side of Acton Drive, going up to essentially where all the way up to concession 10. There is opportunity to take a side trail off right at lot 50, kind of follow where this diversion ditch is going in behind the lots and take that out to concession 10. Since that time, Brian and Mr. Pride have been in discussions with another new trail system from the existing pumping station down to around lot 37. So there's opportunity for additional trails to be added to the existing trail network in that area. And yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Councilor Grace.
I have more question, Mr. Mayor. And this is a resident question as well. Wanting to know if approved and construction starts, will there be disruption to existing sewer and water services for existing residents?
Who wants that one? The director?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there could be disruptions for the final connections. So the water main would be built, and then sometimes you need to shut valves off in different locations. So some houses may be affected. This is more likely to happen down at the Acton and Fenton corner, where there'll be a few houses that are disrupted to do that final connection of water main, but that is the only anticipated interruption.
And how would residents be notified that that might be impending?
Mr. Mayor, we give 48 hours notice as a minimum for that to happen. Letters and knocks on doors happen to the residents so that they are well aware of that. Resident inspectors are there watching the construction as it goes on, and any emergency thing, the same thing happens, knocks on doors and or letters left.
Okay. All right. Further questions or comments from members? Just a couple of comments from me. One, I think it's really important to remember in the case of this particular development, the context of the discussion that happened in 2008 in the phase 1, 2, and 3 of this broader development in this area. And at that time, in 2008, at the same time as we were considering creating these subdivisions, that entire parcel of land to the east was transferred by the developer to the municipality. So I've heard some comments in the community, concern about developing, in this wooded area, taking down more trees and these things. And I think it's really important for everybody to just remember that context. That's approximately, well, about 50 hectares of bush has already been transferred to the town of Saugeen Shores as part of, back at that time, as part of this broader development. And we stand to get about 30 hectares more, but it'll be about a 80 hectares of contiguous bush will be in public hands. And all of that at one time was proposed to be developed and probably could have been developed had the developer wanted to pursue that. But instead of doing that, the developer chose to develop the 3 phases of this broader development. This is phase 3 that we're looking at, or was phase 3 at the time. Decided to take that parcel out and to essentially hand over and preserve 80 hectares. So tonight we're looking at 10 hectares of development, but we always have to remember, I think from 13 years ago, that 80 hectares that got turned over. And in my view, that was a pretty good deal and in the public interest. So I wanted to raise that. And the other thing is the affordable housing question. I was pleased to see that the developer added or was talking about adding 5 secondary suites. I would really encourage you, though, Mr. Snyder, to look carefully at that and see if there's opportunities to do more of that in the subdivision. I think it can be a profitable venture, and it would certainly go a long way to helping us to fight a big problem that we have in terms of affordable housing in the community. I think those secondary suites can be effective anywhere in the community. And so I'm pleased to see that the door is opened a little bit to doing some of that here, and I'd certainly encourage you to look at it carefully to see if more can be done, because it's a very high priority for this council. So those are my 2 comments, but I'm looking forward to the discussions that are going to take place after tonight, and we'll be hearing back from our staff after they and the proponent have a chance to absorb what's been the information that's been communicated to them here tonight, as well as in writing. And we will be getting back a report for a final decision at a subsequent council meeting. And I would just also remind members of the public that if you have more questions, comments about this proposal, make sure to submit them to our staff, and they will be happy to receive them and pass them along to council. So that brings us to the end of this public meeting, and thank you all very much. So our final public meeting is actually a public information center for the water and wastewater master servicing plan. And I guess, should I turn it over to, who am I going to turn it over to? Jay Posner will kick us off. Jay.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just introduce this briefly. The Water and Sewer Servicing Master Plan is another one of our significant planning documents, helps guide our decisions when we're, after we were looking at the planning and how we want the community to develop, we need to service it. The master plan does that. It's looking at the water and sewer services specifically. And over the last year or so, we've had BM Ross help us out in reviewing and updating the plan. So tonight, I'd like them to spend the next few minutes educating council and the public a bit on its process and including its next steps after tonight's meeting. They're going to describe some of its key findings and recommendations, which, if you haven't read over them, have some impact on how we will plan and build out our community. And then after the presentation, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to invite the members of the public that registered to provide their input. Also to invite council if they have questions or comments, and BM Ross will take those comments, consider them, and revise the plan if they need to, and then I'll let them go from here then.
Thanks very much, Jay. So I will just get my screen share going. And if I could get a nod that folks can see it. Perfect. Thank you very much. So as Jay said, my colleague Andrew and I are here to provide an update on the servicing master plan. This is part of the municipal class environmental assessment process. We're doing a master plan under that process, and as part of that, we need to have a public information center. So this is really a Coles Notes kind of presentation about the master plan. The master plan is available on the municipality's website for those of you who'd like to get into the nitty-gritty of it. I'm going to just provide a brief overview of what the master plan update is and what it's about, and talk about the growth and development that was used as the forecasts that were used to drive this study. And then I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to talk about the infrastructure analysis that were done. And that primarily focuses on the water and wastewater systems for Port Elgin and Southampton. And then we'll talk about the alternative solutions that were evaluated as part of this master plan process and what came out of those evaluations in terms of recommended solutions moving forward and next steps. So this master plan is an update of a previous master plan that was done back in 2014. So we're basically looking at what's changed since 2014, and we want to make sure that we identify any existing infrastructure needs, as well as looking forward into the future, what might be needed for Port Elgin and Southampton in terms of water and wastewater infrastructure. And what you want at the end of this master plan process is essentially a roadmap that sets out what you need to plan for as you move forward. So it will, at the end of it, you have basically a list of recommendations in terms of infrastructure works or studies that you need to start thinking about so that you can plan and budget as you move forward in time. For this master plan, we've identified works and studies based on a kind of high, medium, and low priorities so that the municipality can plan accordingly and budget accordingly as well. So for this master plan, an important part of it is, of course, looking at future growth. And I don't think anybody would disagree with me if I said, you know, Saugeen Shores is experiencing a fair bit of growth. It seems every time I drive up to Port Elgin, there's new houses and new roads going in, which is great to see. We use the development charges forecast as the basis for our analysis in this master plan study. And so this chart shows both the additional people that are forecasted as well as the additional units that are forecasted. So the units are the bars along the bottom, and then the people are the lines. And it's Port Elgin in yellow and Southampton in blue. So you can see both communities are expected to grow. More is expected in Port Elgin, and this is based on just the development proposals that are kind of in the works in Port Elgin and Southampton. But by 2041, generally we expect that the population of the two communities combined will be about a little over 26,000 people. And it's that growth that's really driving your future infrastructure needs and your planning. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrew. Whoops, I went the wrong way. There we go.
Thanks, Lisa, and thank you, Mayor and members of council, for having us tonight. As Lisa said, it'd be a bit of an understatement to say you folks have some growth to consider how to handle over the next number of years. So there's a lot of information to process in looking at that. As you'll have seen if you looked at the master plan draft document at all. I'm really just going to try to touch on the high points to keep it a bit brief. And even then, by the time I'm done, you'll think I'm crazy if that's what I call brief in going through this. But certainly at the end, if you have any questions of anything we've gone through too quickly, we're happy to take those up. Starting with water treatment, you've got one treatment plant that does both communities in two different pressure zones. And our primary interest with water treatment is what it can produce on a total daily basis. So the maximum day demand for the communities is the primary concern. You know, throughout the day, You've got peak times in the morning when everyone's showering, getting ready for work or for school. It dips down a bit during the day, and then at the end of the day again, it might go up with dinner time or doing laundry and that kind of thing. So it changes over the course of a day, but our primary concern is what's the maximum day demand you might expect to see, recognizing that you can't have consecutive maximum days one after the other. The shorter term peaks are met from storage. So looking at your historical data, you're getting pretty close to your maximum days the last couple of years occurring in summertime, pretty close to matching what the plant is able to put out. It's rated for something higher, but there are some constraints right now just with the number of filter membranes there. So there's no real reserve the way it's equipped right now. Without any significant, without any real building or site expansion, but just by putting some more treatment membranes within the existing tankage in the plant, based on these forecasts, you could achieve the capacity that's needed to get somewhere around 2027 if the growth is steady the way it's shown. Beyond 2027, there will be a need for additional capacity that would need to come via a more fulsome plant expansion. You've got space at the site that could happen with some additional building footprint and some additional treatment membranes. The actual way that that's done would require a little bit more study, but you've got the space to handle it there. So the short-term need is met by populating those membranes, and the longer term would be something more fulsome than that. Water storage is really strongly linked to the water treatment as well. If you didn't have storage capacity, your treatment plant would really need to put out a value that can meet those shorter term peaks. But generally, those shorter term peaks are met from storage. If there's a fire event, that's met from storage as well. And the way it's shown on this slide right now, the green lines represent Zone 1, that's Southampton, generally west of Grenville Street. The dashed line would be what is readily available from that storage, and the solid line would be what's needed based on ministry guidelines. So you'll see that the requirement for Southampton is actually a bit higher than what's readily available now in Port Elgin and the east side of Grenville Street, Zone 2. It's about the opposite proportionally, that currently you've got a bit more effective storage than you actually need based on guidelines. And then if you look at both communities combined, you're pretty well bang on what the guidelines would suggest. And therefore, as growth continues, you're going to need some more storage. You'll see kind of a funny shape pattern central in the graphs there. That's really just a consequence of the formulas that are used to come up with what's recommended for storage. And they're all population based one way or another, but at a certain population threshold, there's a bit of a jump in what's recommended for fire storage. And that's the reason for that kind of funny blip there. In the short term, some of the additional storage needs can be met by doing some control modifications related to how the storage facilities are drained and then refilled. In the longer term, there will be a need for additional storage facilities. Water distribution system, we're just talking about the buried pipe, the water main in the ground. So we look at that by running a computer model, incorporating all the pipes, and we're really looking at what kind of pressure can customers expect under a range of operational conditions. And then we also look at what level of fire flow protection should be available in different locations in the community. This is just an update to modeling that we previously did in 2014, and sort of as expected, found that there's no real concerns or issues with the existing water main in the communities. Within Port Elgin, there will be a number of extensions that are kind of circled on this figure in red, and the lines shown in black there, really just linked to accommodating future growth in that community. No major extensions required in Southampton. But of course, the individual development parcels would have internal water main within those areas that would be the design for that local water main would be a function of the engineering and planning for each development. We're just looking at kind of the trunk major water main to get those connected. So that's the highlights on the water side of things. On wastewater, start with the Port Elgin wastewater treatment plant. You'll see that currently that horizontal line represents the rated capacity, and that's just call that an annual average day rating. So if you take the whole volume that the plant sees over 365 days and divide it by 365, each day on average, that's what the plant's rated for. You'll see that currently the average flow is pretty well under what that value is, but by 2033, again, with the current growth projections, we'd anticipate seeing that fully utilized. It's possible that, based on some of the feedback we're getting from operations staff there and some of the physical constraints of the plant, it's possible you'd want to look at an earlier expansion of the headworks, sort of the very starting stages of the treatment plant, as well as some of the biosolids, sludge treatment and storage as well. But really, you'd want to do that in conjunction with thinking about what the future has in store for anything beyond that 2033 timeline. How would it all fit together in a bigger plant upgrade? And that would be the subject of some additional study through a Class EA for that plant. The Southampton wastewater treatment plant is a little bit closer to reaching its rated capacity, and it really has two ratings, an annual average day flow similar to Port Elgin, but also a peak rating, so much shorter time frame. You're thinking of hours or a day rather than that total annual volume. So it's much closer to meeting both of those numbers, but that's also why it's the subject of a class environmental assessment, sort of separate to this process that you're already undertaking, looking at how that capacity would be increased. Similar to how we looked at the water distribution network, we'd also look at the sewer collection network. It's a little bit more complicated than the water distribution side of things. Broken it down by major catchment area for each of the main sewage pumping stations. But again, we're just trying to identify constraints within the existing system as well as what would be a constraint for bringing some of these future developments online. Within each catchment area, or maybe not within each one, but through several of them, identified a small number of sewer pipes that would be identified as either being constrained or nearly at their sort of constrained limit for what they're theoretically rated for. But they're not big in number or in scale of the constraints. So we don't see, major red flags there that would require any kind of immediate addressing. They'd more just be the kind of things that you'd normally address through the course of typical road reconstruction projects, that kind of thing. We do each of these on the basis of where the sewers are flowing to, and that's typically sewage pumping station. And with each of your sewage pumping stations, there's really only one SPS number 1 in Southampton that was identified as being constrained in terms of its capacity, where there'd be some upsizing required to handle the future flows. So within the master plan, we talk about alternative solutions to each of the constraints that are identified. So this table is really just taken from the master plan document, and you'll see a general trend with water supply or wastewater treatment. I mean, really in broad strokes, your options come down to you're either going to have to reduce the current demand and projected demand, or increase capacity to meet that demand. And it's generally fairly impractical maybe even not possible to do a lot to reduce demand. There are sometimes special circumstances that would make that untrue. But generally, and especially in the case of where this additional flow is coming from growth, it's pretty hard to try to meet that need by reducing demand. So generally, you're looking at expansion. For the water treatment plant, there's sort of this short-term need to get additional capacity that can be met within the existing building footprint. And then beyond that 2027 year, we'd see a need to do something more comprehensive to address that. Again, with water storage, there's sort of a short-term way to gain some additional storage capacity that would come via modifications to how those facilities are controlled and refilled. But on the longer term, there will be a need for additional infrastructure as well, not just the control changes. So from those alternatives, come up with recommended solutions. And again, this will sound a bit redundant on the water treatment plant side of things, but populating the membranes to 100% of what the plant could have installed right now would get you that 5 or 6 years needed in the short term. And general cost estimate for that is somewhere in the realm of $500,000. Beyond that, to do a real physical expansion to the plant is going to be in today's dollars in the $7 to $9 million range, and that there will come a time when that's needed based on the growth that you're going to see. For storage, when it's just the control related changes, nothing really in terms of actual infrastructure being built. Those programming changes are fairly small scale, like in the order of $10,000 estimated. To actually build additional storage requires a couple of things that would all be done through a Class EA process, but you've got to find the right kind of land to put it in, and then the right kind of facility. There's options for buried or raised infrastructure, and then for the volume that you're looking at needing down the road, you'd be somewhere either side of $3 million to construct that kind of storage. The water main itself, again, mostly linked within the Port Elgin area. The value of all the water main improvements to connect these development lands. Again, just the water main, not really the full road construction, somewhere just under $3 million projected to do that. On the wastewater side of things, again, similar to water, you can either try to reduce flows, which there may be a little bit more opportunity with on the wastewater side of things. Wastewater is a combination of real sewage that customers are actually generating. There's also flow that gets into the sewers that shouldn't be there from snow melt or rainfall, groundwater, that kind of thing. Yours isn't extreme in your communities, but there may be a few locations where some more study might identify places that sewers could be remediated or replaced, that you could knock those numbers down a bit. So there's some potential there, but that takes generally a long time and often takes more capital than increasing capacity. So that could take a little bit more study to figure out the best way to do that for SPS1 for pumping. And for treatment, again, for Port Elgin, you got a bit of time, but it will take some more study to figure out the best way to do that. And the Southampton treatment plant, you're already underway in the Class CA, looking at how to expand that capacity. The recommendations that would come from this would be for Port Elgin, that you do eventually undertake a Class EA similar to what you're doing for Southampton to look at expansion there. But by the time that you expand that plant for the scale that you'd be looking at, that'd be like an over $10 million type project to get that level of expansion. But you got a few years before that needs to happen. Just the headworks itself at that plant and just the biosolids sludge management would take a bit more study and working with operations staff there to figure that out as well. But again, you'd want to keep the long-term bigger picture in mind while doing that. In Southampton, the treatment plant there, again, the Class EA is underway, and the current cost estimate related to that expansion is just under $14 million. And then the SPS1 capacity increase, if we were to kind of ignore potential opportunities to reduce flow there and just went to new pumps, new generator, new electrical controls, it'd be somewhere around $750,000 to do that kind of undertaking and expand that capacity. The sewer sections themselves, again, I don't think we're identifying any as real high priority, but for the ones that were flagged, we attached a cost estimate that it might take to replace those sewers. Again, we generally recommend that that's just being done with street reconstruction. I guess that could change if development became, at an even faster pace in some of these affected areas than projected, and that might drive some of the upgrades a little bit sooner, but generally not a primary concern for that infrastructure. The next steps, really, in terms of the master plan update itself, we take any comments received on the presentation, and then whatever it takes to incorporate those into the actual document, and then the master plan study report would be finalized, and the notice of completion would be issued. In terms of the infrastructure itself, tried to highlight what we see to be sort of the highest priority items, and that would again be the adding additional membranes at the existing water treatment plant, modifying some controls related to how the water storage facilities are utilized, and then beginning to look at longer term for storage. What would new infrastructure look like? Where would it be, and what style, and how does it integrate with your existing systems? For the Port Elgin wastewater treatment plant, looking at the headworks would be probably the first thing that's going to be initiated there, we'd suggest, in terms of looking at expansion, and then determining the preferred course of action for the SPS1 in Southampton. Addressing that capacity would be a priority project as well. So I know that's a real whirlwind to get through a bunch of information, but again, we're definitely happy to take any questions now.
Okay, well, thanks, Andrew and Lisa. And we do have one member of the public who is interested in speaking to us tonight. So we will bring that individual in to hear from him. And it's Dave Reynolds. So Dave, you here? Oh, there he is. We have you there, Dave. Are you there?
Hello. Hello. Yes,
Hello.
Dave. Yeah, I was hoping to get on the video, but I just still doesn't seem to even work on my iPad. So I even changed my method, but I don't know.
Well, that's all right. We can hear you fine, Dave. Yeah. The floor is yours.
Okay. Yeah. What I have more is, I guess, more of a question than anything. The concern I have is that, under the Municipal Engineers Association's Municipal Class EA and the Ontario Water Resources Act, they identify wastewater to include drainage and stormwater. And I guess the question I have is, I in this report that I've gone through, I see one reference to stormwater under the provincial planning requirements, section 2.4.1, that this study is to follow, where it does make reference to stormwater, but stormwater isn't at all referenced anywhere in the report itself. And I guess that's my question is, if all those agencies identify stormwater as a wastewater, why would it not be part of the wastewater municipal EA?
Maybe the director can address that, Amanda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We are we're currently conducting a drainage master plan at the same time. So stormwater management is being addressed through that study, and it's coming to council this summer as well.
Yeah, because I know I did comment on these. I guess that's the one that I think the Beechers we commented on back in January. Is that the one that was circulated earlier this year, Amanda?
Mr. Mayor, it has been circulated earlier this year at the earlier stage of that planning process.
Yeah, and I know at that stage that didn't have much as far as handling stormwater as a wastewater. And I guess since it is classified as a wastewater, and I know when we got into this debate with Canada 25, the Schedule A+ was handled because it was considered by the MOE a wastewater project. So anyway, I know it might be, I just think that the drainage one doesn't seem to address water as a wastewater, and the wastewater study doesn't address drainage water at all. So I'm as from the public, I'm just a bit concerned how the kind of the stormwater, which everybody understands is not clean going into the lake and onto the beaches, is being considered as and treatment considered where possible. I don't mean through the plants and all that, but obviously it's a different method of cleaning stormwater than it is the sanitary sewers, for sure.
Okay. All right, is that the end of your comments, Mr. Reynolds?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for those comments, and certainly take them under consideration. And we don't have any other members of the public interested in speaking to us on this one, so I guess I'll ask if there's any comments from members of the committee. Once, of course, recognizing that once this is been completed and in final draft form, it's going to come back to us, so we're going to have another opportunity to discuss it when we look at it to adopt it. We'll start with Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question for staff, I guess. At certain points, it talks about one of the solutions for wastewater treatment, reducing the annual average daily flow and existing peak flows. And I just wondered how that would be done.
Who wants to?
Well, I actually think Lisa or Andrew are in a really good position to answer.
Yeah.
They were aware of this question coming, so they've had a chance to prepare.
All right. Take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Mayor. The short answer is it'd be really hard to do. The longer answer, I guess, is that, you know, in the age of looking at climate change and wanting to consider those kind of things, that it should be at least given a cursory review. Is it practical, or could it be practical to reduce the volume of flow that's coming? There are certain communities where you might have collection sewers in a really poor state of repair, and you get all kinds of groundwater flow or snow melt coming in that over the course of a year can be pretty significant in terms of the volume that comes. And in those cases, it might be a fair recommendation to say you got to address those sewer conditions and start to bring down the flow. In your communities, in fact, just prior to initiation of this master plan process, there was also some sewer flow monitoring, infiltration and inflow study work completed that helped to feed the information for this study. And what was found that although there is certainly that component in your community, it's not extreme compared to the average community. And you know, if you did a block of sewer at a time, trying to line it or replace it, over time you might really slowly bring down that annual volume, but it would be several orders of magnitude more costly to do that than to deal with a sewage pumping station capacity increase. Having said that, sewage pumping station 1 in Southampton, there were a couple of more localized locations started to be identified, but probably require a little bit more study work. There may be some opportunity to bring down some flows specific to that area, which would give some benefit, but in the broader community sense, it'd be difficult or impossible to have a meaningful impact in bringing down flows from what's existing.
Are there further questions? The Vice Deputy Mayor?
Mr. Mayor, Amanda, when was the last time we did our water and wastewater study?
Through Mr. Mayor, I believe it was 2014. Is that correct, Andrew? Yep.
7 years ago. It just seems to me like when I read the report, I think I saw an urgent, I saw some high priority. It just seems to have, I don't know, crept up on us fairly quickly here with some high priorities and 10 million and 12 million and a lot of big costs. And but in your view, Andrew and Lisa, we're like the town let's talk about water for starters. I have a question about sanitary for Southampton plant as well, but we're still in 15,000 cubic meters today. I think we have the capacity to produce. We put in some new membranes. We're still in fairly good shape, correct? Like, I mean, from a water production and water usage standpoint, we're not in an urgent situation here, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I agree that we're not in an urgent situation at all. High priority just means it's what we need to be doing in the next 1 to 5 years. It's not that we're at a critical thing and we would have been neglecting it. These are what they're saying we should do first and move forward. Was there something you wanted to add to that, Andrew?
It'd probably just be reiterating that to try to align with some of the way that your priorities are described. I think in some of your other study work, we just try to break it down, like, yeah, the 1 to 5 year, the 6 to 10 year, the sort of 11 year and beyond. And so, yeah, I would agree that you're not in dire straits here. The mistake would be to, ignore it now and let it go 5 or 10 more years, but you do this and identify what needs to happen next and just keep evolving that way.
Thanks for that. I just think it's good to give the public some reassurances that we're in good shape. We've been investing a lot of money in water and new water tower, obviously $2 million, and improvements to our water plant. And I'm all in favor. We'll be supporting a budget time, additional studies, and let's keep the process moving in a fast lane. But the one question I had about the sanitary, from the Southampton sewage plant, how many, because I read a report recently, well, in this report too, but in the past, we've had tours of that plant. How many houses, single family dwelling units, how many houses are we away from reaching full capacity there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, because we had this question ahead of time, which I appreciate, Vice Deputy Mayor. Adam says we're like 180 to 200 houses we've got capacity for, and we're in good stead to still move forward with the development applications that we're seeing.
Great. So where the development's going to continue, and it's just that obviously is a high priority and something we'll be investing some pretty big dollars. And I guess the charges that are levied each year budget time for, I think last year staff were recommending an 8% increase, I believe, in water sewer charge. I can't remember the exact number. I think we came in with a 6%, but something Amanda will be talking about, I guess, in this year's budget with our water surcharges.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, for sure. And the Southampton Class EA is coming to council again in August. So these studies are all aligning well to come in with that budget line. So you will see a well-supported request for those rate increases.
Mr. Mayor, I just want to thank Lisa and Andrew and Matt. I found the report, I sometimes don't understand reports too clearly, but I found these reports really easy to follow, easy to understand, and I just want to thank you for your good work.
Yeah. All right, very good. Council Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Two questions. One is around the cost estimates that we saw here today. Presumably those dollar figures are based in 2021 dollars. And as is the case with most other construction endeavors, they're only going in one direction, right? And at a rate that seems to be exceeding inflation. I know general house construction and anything with wood in it is going that way, and I presume it's the same for concrete and plastic pipe. So we can only expect those numbers to go up as we get closer to the trigger points, 2027 is not that far away. So that is the case, right? It's $21.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is correct. I guess the caveat I'd add to that is that even these numbers would have been put together a couple of months ago, and we've seen a couple of ugly things this year in terms of tender pricing and other locales. So I'd really hate to be the one to pull out my crystal ball and tell you what's going to happen 5 or 10 years from now. And it probably depends on which media outlet you follow and what's happening with lumber futures and that kind of thing as well right now. So they'd be the best estimates based on the most recent kind of tender pricing. But
a betting man would say it's not going to be cheaper in the future. The second question is around the demand management. Do we have any plans, or do we have any current? I don't think we have any current programs. We have around the demand management. Certainly, the capacity factors that we see are based on peak periods, and we see the peaks in the summertime. We see them at certain times of the day, morning and evening. Peaks, obviously, the ebbs would be in the overnight and perhaps midday periods. Like happened in the electricity industry a number of years ago, there was incentives for people to use the resource at off-peak periods or during low demand periods, and typically the incentive for doing something like that is to make it cheaper. You know, we have the time of use pricing for our electricity now, and it might only be a few cents, but it certainly drives people to doing their laundry and the dishwashers in the middle of the night as opposed to at dinner time. And is there any ideas around applying some of those principles to the water plan to be able to stretch out some of these trigger points so that we can incentivize people, whether monetarily or through voluntarily, to get people to use their water more efficiently? Use low flow toilets. Use your showering has to be done, I guess, in the morning, most working people, but do your laundry in the middle of the night as opposed to at dinner time or in the first thing in the morning, and that kind of. Is there any plans to do that sort of thing? Demand management.
Comments on that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we don't have those plans at this time. There's in the water industry, there's one common thing that would be done at which is time of year. So you would have a summer rate versus a winter rate, so that you could be charging more for the lawn watering. Here we've opted just to use the water lawn bylaw, so it's restricted times throughout the year for that use of water. But as we go forward with a rate study for the water and wastewater, that's something that we could look into that piece, but not as part of this master plan.
Presumably our current metering system, as electronic and remote as it is, wouldn't have the capacity to record what time of day you're using the water. It's just a simple counter, right?
Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure the capacity to do that. It might be able to be with a software upgrade. I don't know, but currently we're just collecting the data on daily use. Right,
because there doesn't seem to be any incentive for somebody. I know I live on a well, and I know when we're in drought conditions, which we're practically in right now, we have to exercise a bit of demand management on our well use, and so it becomes part of living in the country, is making sure you've got enough water. So those same principles, if we just have it so you turn the tap on and it comes out at the same price all the time, then there's no incentive for people to economize, right? Thanks for that.
Okay, thank you. Further comments from members? Well, thanks very much for the presentation this evening. I think our overall principle has got to be to ensure we have more than enough supply for everybody who lives in the community today and coming to the community in the future. And so this plan helps us figure out how to do that, both to supply them with water and to service them with wastewater services. And it's critically important that we plan today, given how our community is changing. So this is an important step for us to take, and so I much appreciate that. And it's another, and the Vice Deputy Mayor was talking about funding. Another important thing that we're considering right now to help us pay for all this is development charges. And so if we're talking about our DCs, which we will be soon, keep those numbers in mind, because a lot of those are driven by growth, and big chunks of that are going to be bid off by our development charges. So, but I digress. Thanks very much for your presentation, and we will move on in the agenda. Does anybody need a break at this point, or are we? Yeah, okay. So why don't we take a break? We'll pause and return at 20 after 9.
All members back, and we've reached 9:20. You may begin.
Thank you, Linda. Then we're moving on to 6.2 and reports, and 6.21, which is Ed 2020-069, Ernest Property Incorporated on Saugeen Street. And we can turn over the planner to briefly take us through the recommendation.
Yes, I'll just share my screen. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The public meeting for this zoning application was held last month on May 17th. There is no civic address. Mr. Ernest's vacant property is situated across from the Saugeen River on the south side of Saugeen Street and to the east of Albert Street North in Southampton. As committee may recall, the applicant wishes to construct 4 bungalow townhouses with front porches and rear decks. The 2 parking spaces will be provided. A wooden fence is proposed along the southerly, easterly, and westerly boundaries. The owner will retain ownership of the townhouses for the long term and will be leasing the units. The applicant still wishes at this time to sever the subject lands into 4 individual parcels, including the retained parcel. The intent is that in the future, there will be the option to sell the units individually. The purpose of the zoning application is to rezone the subject lands from residential first density to residential fourth density special holding R420H. Relief is required to reduce the lot area from 250 square meters to 211.44 square meters for lot 2 and 215.17 square meters for lot 3. Relief is required to reduce the interior side yard setback from 3 meters to 1.2 meters for lot 4. Relief is required to reduce the rear yard depth from 7.5 meters to 6.01 meters for lot number 1. Relief is required to exceed the maximum lot coverage from 35% to 41.68% for lot number 1, to 51.82% for lot number 2, and 54.28% for lot number 3, and 45.43% for lot number 4. These lot coverage calculations differ from what I had presented to committee at the public meeting. The calculations do not include the decks at the rear of the units. Now I will speak to our responses to the land use issues raised at the public meeting. The draft bylaw has been revised to establish a maximum height of 8 meters and to prohibit an apartment dwelling. The lot coverages for lots 1 through 4 have been revised to exclude the rear decks. The bylaw now includes the lot frontage, the lot coverage for the overall site, which is 52.98%. The maximum lot coverage permitted by the zoning bylaw is 35%. A neighbor requested that the landowner consider reducing the number of units from 4 to 3. According to the landowner, 4 units is the best utilization of the lot. Mr. Ernest said this will help keep the rental prices lower compared to building only 3 units. Committee indicated that they wanted to see the units kept in the rental market and not be severed and sold in the future. Mr. Ernest intends to lease the units for the long term. However, he still wishes to proceed with the applications for consent to sever the units. The rationale he's provided is as follows. Firstly, he will be able to leverage the rental houses to help him grow and expand his rental property business. Secondly, this gives the option to sell individually once he retires. as an investor in the rental market, he says it is imperative to have a plan for liquidation at the end of a career. He says he will consider an agreement to regulate the sale of the units. For example, he is willing to enter into a 5-year guarantee that the units will be used as rentals. There'll be a privacy fence built along the rear of the property. Privacy fences are proposed between each unit. On the exterior units, the fence will come along the lot line and wrap back into each unit. This will close off the backyard for those 2 units. Details of the fencing will be dealt with at the site plan approval stage. To incorporate accessibility features, there will be 1 step up into the houses and large entrances, including large front doors. The laundry, bathroom, and accessory showers and tubs and bedroom will be on the main floor. Ms. Dozek is concerned about how the proposed development will affect the future development of a vacant site. Mr. Ernest has advised that the distance is 7.96 meters and 7.91 meters to the lot line of the Dozek vacant property. This is measured from the proposed units 4 and 3 respectively. There will be no negative impact to her site. Comments relating to drainage, stormwater management, fencing, landscaping, and building facades will be dealt with at the site plan approval stage. There was a question, what is the effect of the townhouse development on the values of existing properties? The developer advises the design of these townhouses will not cause a negative effect to the current house prices in the neighborhood. Based on his experience, the units could increase the cost of the neighboring houses. I should also note that the Planning Act deals with land use matters only and does not address impact on existing property values. Just as a recap, the zoning bylaw amendment is requested to rezone the subject lands from residential 1 to residential 4th density spatial holding. The zoning bylaw will facilitate the construction of 4 bungalow townhouses on the subject lands. With respect to the recommendation, we are recommending that the zoning bylaw amendment application Z69 be approved. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Barbara. I'll read the recommendation, then we can take questions or comments. It's recommended that zoning bylaw amendment Z 2020-069 for lands described as Southampton Part Lot DN, Clarendon Street, reference plan 3R9974, Part 1, geographic town of Southampton, be approved, and that the amending bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption. Questions or comments to the recommendation? Councilor Grace. And then Councilor Rich.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Barbara, for the updated report. I appreciate the changes that Mr. Ernest has made in the proposal. The possibility of a commitment to a rental period of 5 years or some other time that council may and staff may agree upon. I particularly like the exclusion of the apartment dwelling on R4 because it could be without that provision, and the 8-meter height restriction. And I also appreciate his response to my question about including accessible features, which are going to be included during the construction period. So that will save expense later on. So those are my comments.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Rich.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's a great idea. I think this is exactly what we've been asking the community to provide. We've been asking investors to do this kind of thing. And I think that it's imperative that we support ideas like this because it's going to help create attainable housing far into the future.
Thank you. Councilor Myatt and then Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I agree with Councillor Rich. This is ideally suited for this location. The encroachments are reasonable. As Councillor Grace said, the agreement that he would keep them as rentals for 5 years is that a suggestion, or were you actually going to follow through on that and make him make that agreement? Because if he's willing to go 5 years, maybe he's willing to go 10 years. He said he's in it for the long term, and he seems like a young fellow getting into this business. So If he's offering, we should not pass up the opportunity to make him sign an agreement like that.
Okay. We can consider that discussion at the end. We'll get the deputy mayor next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. I agree, it's a great development, but I think we need to be a little cognizant of what he could actually do. He's doing a nice thing here by putting them in at a certain height. He could quite easily say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take the lot, I'm going to split it and put 2 duplexes on there. And there's nothing we can do about it. I myself don't like the fact that we're trying to limit this one developer to a lease project. If he wants to sell them at some time, he can sell them. It's his prerogative. It's his land. It's his property. So I like the development. I don't like the putting the restriction on of having to keep them as leasable properties for 5, 6, 10 years, as some people are suggesting, because markets change, people change, and this is the only developer that we've talked this about. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sure, thank you. Further questions or comments? So I don't see any. So we do have that one suggestion. So we can't, my understanding is it wouldn't be appropriate to implement or to attempt to implement a limitation like that as part of zoning bylaw amendment. It would be if we were to impose a or come to an agreement on a period at which or during which the property would be would have to be leased as opposed to sold. That would have to come either at the point of approving the severances or at the site plan stage. So I think I guess what we can do this evening, if the committee wants, is we can give some indication to staff if we would like them to come back at that time with an agreement, which they could work through with the developer or not, whether that's something we want to pursue or not. I think I do agree, that we have not pursued something like this with a developer in the past, but it's something we should pursue in the future because we need rentals and we need fewer of if we're going to approve high density development, we need more of it to stay in the rental market, particularly in the near term, because my expectation is that as you go out 10 years, we're going to get more large developments, apartment buildings, these kinds of things to start soaking up more of the rental need. But in the immediate term, we don't have enough rental, and we need, if we can get agreements for 5 or 10 years to get folks to keep properties in the rental market, then I think that that's something that we can do. This developer's offered up 5 years. My suggestion would be take them up on it. I don't think we need to, the whole weight of the world doesn't need to come down on his head. He's offered up 5, we'll take it. And, but I think on the caveat that, we're going to ask this of more developers when they come to us looking for severances and higher density developments, because this is what we need. So anyway, that would be my own personal thought, but I think it would be good if we could give some direction to staff about what we would like to see them come back with when we're doing the severance or at the site plan stage with regard to that. The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't going to comment, but I just want to follow up on what you said. I think this really sends a good message to our community about the 5 years that, we really do need help from developers to bring affordable, attainable housing into our community. And I don't know exactly what they're going to rent these places for, but I hope they're fairly respectable numbers. And so I like it. I like he's offered up 5 years. I think we should take it and in the process send the message out to other developers that, we need your help. This is something we need to do in our community to bring in more attainable housing. And so I think it's a good thing. And I like to see staff pursue that for sure.
Okay, is there other comments on that? We have some agreement with that approach and some opposition to it. Maybe we could just ask the question: how many are in favor of staff returning at a future date with an agreement about a 5-year restriction on on this? And how many oppose it? It's okay, so that gives us clear, that gives staff some clear direction on what to do in the future on that. So we'll come back to the main question. Then, is there any further comments on the recommendation as read? I don't see any, so we'll ask all in favor. That's carried. Okay, so that moves on to 6.2.2 Z 2021-021 Ernest Properties Incorporated, 83 Victoria Street. And we'll turn it over to Daniel Kingsbury for the report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm just going to bring up the report here. This is another project of Mr. Ernest, and of course the public meeting was held last month for this, and this is coming back for a decision this evening. The property is at 83 Victoria Street. This is the current structure on the house. Mr. Ernest is proposing to tear down this structure and replace it with a semi-detached structure with a one-story with a basement walkout, from what I understand. So another image of the existing structure at the back. You'll note a fairly steep hill in the backyard, and there's the proposal. So Mr. Ernest, similar to his other proposal, is looking to sever the property through a related consent application, and it's a fairly straightforward rezoning in terms of what's being sought. It's the rezoning from the current zone, residential first density R1, to residential second density R2, because at this stage the R2 zone permits semi-detached, whereas the R1 zone does not. So just a brief covering of pertinent policies. PPS settlement area policies, of course, encourage this type of development on full private or full public municipal services, and intensifying an existing use. Both the county and town official plans also encourage this sort of intensification in the built up area. And as mentioned, it's currently zoned R1. So towns provided comments. They're requiring hooked up to water and sewer, obviously, and 5% in lieu of parkland dedication. And they'll require an entrance permit. The SVCA has reviewed the application and finds it acceptable. No public comments were received through the public process, and no one spoke at the public meeting as well on this one. So with that in mind, it's rezoning from R1 to R2 to facilitate the construction of a semi-detached dwelling, so containing 2 units. And the staff recommendation is that the zoning bylaw amendment be approved.
Thank you, Daniel. We have a recommendation. I'll read it. We can take questions. It's recommended that zoning bylaw amendment for application Z 2021-021 for the lands described as town plot part lot 16W Victoria, geographic town of Southampton, be approved, and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption. Questions or comments? The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Oh, to you, Mr. Mayor, to Daniel. Just refresh my memory again. Are these 2 units being brought into the rental market, or are they for resale? I can't remember.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not certain on that. I believe this is Mr. Ernest's business concept, or his business plan is to rent the units. I believe that's what he mentioned. I'm just not 100% certain on that.
Thanks, Daniel. I thought I heard rental, but I just wanted to confirm. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions or comments to this application? Seeing none, you've heard the recommendation. All in favor? That's carried. All right, that moves us then on to 6.2.3 Z 2020-044 Town of Saugeen Shores. And Dan.
Good. Okay. Thank you again, Mr. Mayor and members of committee. This application is, this amendment is a proposal on behalf of the town to amend certain portions of its zoning bylaw to facilitate, make it easier for attainable and affordable housing to be created. So in a sense, this amendment represents the low-hanging fruit that can be implemented in a timely manner, recognizing there's many more policy updates and opportunities to propose modifications to the policy framework around housing. But this is really sort of the first step in grappling with some of the more tangible items that can be achieved right now through a zoning bylaw. So zoning bylaw amendment, that is. So in a quick synopsis, there was a public meeting on May 17th. A number of the items have come forward again for committee's consideration, and just sort of note there's a couple modifications. At committee last month, it was noted there perhaps were some concerns around the public notice and the lack of public response. So did clarify with town staff that there was I suppose enhanced public consultation after the meeting through promotion of the amendment on the town social media. And prior to the public meeting, I just wanted to clarify that that the notice was posted in both the online versions of the Shoreline Beacon, as well as the paper version and the online version of the Saugeen Times, as well as being posted on the town's newsfeed and county website. So that that enhanced engagement that occurred after the public meeting garnered one response from Stu Doyle of Barry's Construction, recommending some modifications. And of course, Barry's Construction is a developer in town that is quite familiar with the zoning bylaw and some of the issues that are encountered through the development of certain housing types and so on. So Mr. Doyle recommended, I think, 5 modifications. Staff felt that 3 of them were probably minor enough that they could be brought forward tonight for consideration by committee, and not necessarily require a public planning process again. But a couple of them were probably consequential enough that they should be considered through another planning exercise at a future date. So I just wanted to make that note just before going through sort of the highlights real quick here. Of course, the building height is one of those highlights. There's a new schedule that's proposed to the zoning bylaw, Schedule C, and it proposes an overlay along the Goddard Street corridor to conceivably allow buildings of up to 6 stories in height to be permitted with appropriate tiered setbacks. There's changes to the secondary dwelling units provisions. Most notably, I would say are the minimum lot area requirements, the prohibition of secondary suites within 500 meters of the lakeshore is proposed to be deleted, so that prohibition would not exist anymore, and secondary dwelling units could in fact be located within 500 meters of the lakeshore. And a suggestion from Mr. Doyle was to allow lot frontage for parcels containing a secondary unit to permit up to 60% of that frontage to be used for a driveway. Currently 50% is permitted. So that just allows a little more space at the front of the structure for parking for units with secondary dwelling units. The R1, the most notable modifications to the R1 would be the incorporation of semi-detached and duplex dwellings now being permitted or proposed to be permitted in the R1 designation, and the lowering of the maximum lot size for the R1 designation from 500 to 450 square meters. So, and there's another recommendation. Again, Mr. Doyle recommended that there be consistent setbacks for accessory structures in all zones and consistent exterior side yard setbacks. So I think that consistency approach makes sense, and is easier for the development community in general and members of the public to navigate through, regardless of what zone they're in. So there's some modifications to the R3 and R4 zones. Again, these are sort of the same modification. I'll just note it looks as though there's a duplicate in the report. The second proposed modifications to the R3 zone in the report should read proposed modifications to the R4 zone. And these modifications really recognize that the town's existing provisions around row housing make it problematic, particularly for the interior units of those structures to meet the lot area requirements. So there's some recognition around lot area and frontages to facilitate the construction of row housing in the R3 and R4 zones. And an accessibility modification to allow 0 meter setbacks for accessibility structures such as ramps in certain areas of the yard. Again, so this makes it easier for people with accessibility issues to sort of quickly build a structure if needed without having to go through a variance process. I think that for the most part captures many of the main highlights, but I'm available to answer any questions if committee has any.
Okay, so I have a recommendation. I'll read it. We can take questions or comments. It's recommended that the zoning bylaw amendment application Z 2021-044 for the entirety of the lands within the town of Saugeen Shores be approved and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption. Questions or comments from members of the committee? Start with the deputy mayor and then come to Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Daniel, thank you for that. I agree with almost all of it, especially the variances. I'd like to see just a common standard set of variances that we have for side and front yard and backyard setbacks, because that would take a lot of time off of committee adjustment. Everybody that comes in with the building, they set it, and then all of a sudden they want to change. Have a standard setback. If you want to deviate from that, charge them $5,000, do something, but it would take a whole lot of work off. I was talking with people today. If we had that just standard, this is what it is. You don't go past it. This is what it is. That would take a lot of time and effort away from our staff having to deal with that all the time. And I know, Daniel, just about every application you bring to committee of adjustment deals with a variance of some sort. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Daniel, have all these suggested changes since we last saw it? You mentioned former Director Stu Doyle. Have they been incorporated into this document that we see before us here today, or are those suggestions yet to come?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Doyle has recommended 5 recommendations, 3 of the 5 have been incorporated into the proposed zoning bylaw amendment since we last met.
Okay, that's the driveway width, the lot size or lot fill size.
Yeah, so I'll just go through them. One is to reduce the exterior lot line setback in the residential zones. So the exterior lot line, so it matches, so all zones match the R1 zone. So currently the R1 zone setback is 4.5, the other zones are 6. So this would reduce, this would make the exterior setback 4.5 in all zones. The second one is to, again, a more of a consistency approach to allow accessory structures to have the same setback as permitted in the R1. Which is 4.5 meters in the R1. So this would make it consistent across all 3 zones. The other was the maximum driveway width.
Right.
The 2 that weren't included, just real quick, are a reduction of the interior side yard to 1 meter and reduction of the lot frontage for semi-detached from 10 to 8 meters. So I think staff felt that those probably warrant a little more discussion with committee and members of the public, but the sort of consistency among the zones was a fairly logical modification.
Okay, thank you for that. I understand better what we're voting on here.
Okay, the Vice Deputy Mayor, and then Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just want to echo our Deputy Mayor's comments. I think, Don, you're right on. And, you know, I think we create more consistency with setbacks and create a little less work for Committee of Adjustment. I agree with you, Don, but Deputy Mayor, I think you're right on with that comment. And Dan and Jay, thanks so much again for bringing these changes forward. It's just another step forward towards, you know, making attainable affordable housing a little more doable in our community. A few more tools in the toolkit, and I think your work is good work. And Mr. Mayor, if I can just ask you, if I can indulge you just for a minute. Last Thursday there was an interesting decision made by Bruce County planning of Bruce County Council to do with housing. Could you maybe run through that quickly with Council? What was approved last Thursday?
So now you're putting me on the spot, Mike. Which thing was it? There's so many exciting things.
I know. Well, we talked right after the meeting you called, and we chatted about they just passed a housing. There was a housing decision made at Bruce County Council last Thursday, and it was a #1 decision that was made ahead of transportation and other things. But maybe Jay can. But
it was the final homes report.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Right.
Sorry.
It wasn't. We finally adopted the homes discussion paper. So you all members of council saw the discussion paper and we even discussed it, I think, at the planning committee in the draft form, and it was the first of the plan, the Bruce reports that was approved last week. So yeah, that was a important step forward, and I finally remembered it. So there you go.
Well, you were excited at the time we were talking. I mean, I was excited, and then I thought I should just explain what got away from there. It was another step forward in a way. So, but thanks everyone for all your great work on this housing question. We're making some good progress.
I think I had Councillor Carr next.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I guess more of a comment just in regards to the 6 stories that they're proposing here. So I guess if we do adopt this and we do decide to go 6 stories, I understand this is to help out with attainable housing, but has the conversation, you know, maybe we don't have somebody knocking at the doorstep yet to look at 6 stories, but myself, I'm not totally in favor of supporting the 6 stories. I would totally support the 6 stories if, you know, there was something that we could put in the deals with developers again to show that, you know, they are making it cheaper by allowing them to have those extra 2 stories put on. You know, I just don't want to see it be one of those things that some of these places are being built up, you know, they're $1,800 for a 2-bedroom apartment for a 4-story. And, you know, if we let them go 6 stories, does that just mean we're going to go $1,800 an apartment 6 stories higher? Is it something that, you know, the way I'm being sold on it is that that's going to bring down the cost. So therefore that should bring down the rental costs. And I just don't know if that's something that we can have put into this, or if it's something that once we pass this bylaw, that if a developer decides to come in, that, you know, if it takes a lot of that control out of our hand or not. I guess I'm just not clear on it. And I'd just like some clarity on it. Just, I understand why we're doing it. I totally support it if it's going to achieve what we're trying to do with the attainable housing. But if all it's going to do is allow somebody to pad their pockets a little bit deeper, I can't support something like that.
I think what we've heard over the years is from developers is that the height restriction is preventing them from building apartment blocks in the first place. You know, it's hard to justify constructing a multi-story building because if it's only going to be 3 or 4 stories tall, because the elevator cost is so high that it increases the cost, or it reduces what you can earn. Essentially, it reduces the amount of money you can make. So, from my perspective, and others may have views on this that are different, but from my perspective, what this does is removes a barrier from constructing apartment blocks. So those new apartment blocks may be constructed at market rates, and those market rates may be higher, but to begin with at least. But the philosophy here is that the more we get built, the more inventory we have in the market, the over time, the lower the price will come. The older stock at least will be less valuable because there'll be new stock. So probably brand new apartments are going to be more expensive to rent. no matter how tall you build them. But over time, if we can get some apartments built, some rental units built, that should create space for more affordable units across the community. So that's in my conversations with developers over the years, I have certainly heard them say, we might consider building rental apartments, but we just can't justify it with those height restrictions. We can't, it just doesn't make financial sense. So it's certainly a thing we've heard for over the years from the development community. I don't know if others have comments.
I could just add, Mr. Mayor, if I could, I have talked to several developers over the last year, and it's economies of scale, Councillor Carr, and what they're saying is that, the higher up they go, that they were able to drive the prices down somewhat, and that's what I've heard from them. And I've also heard that perhaps there's opportunity with CMHC financing, that maybe a portion of those units can be financed, help finance through CMHC, where they're subsidized, so to speak, for a portion of the number of the units. So the higher they go, more units, the more availability for attainable housing. That's what I've heard. I guess the proof will be in the pudding. Once they get built, what are they charging? But I think I see Jay come on, and he's had some discussions with developers, and Jay, maybe Mr. Mayor Jay can make comment too.
Yeah, you can if you're done.
Well, no,
Jay.
Thank you. I was trying to draw attention to myself a little bit. I'm interested in the conversation, of course, but I guess I want to just take the emphasis on what this zoning bylaw is actually doing. Like, we're not trying to regulate price. Like, we're removing hurdles. We said this at the last meeting. We're just removing hurdles. We acknowledge there are going to be many steps. I don't know how many, but many steps to get to where we want to be. When we start integrating, implementing, and then eventually sustaining the housing policy program and implementation over the long term. So I just I wasn't catching that from this conversation. It was more of a interesting way of conceiving how affordability can be looked at, but we're only tiny part way there.
Yes, there is nothing is a panacea, that's for sure. Councillor Carter, do you have more comments that you want to make? No. Are there further comments from anyone on these? I don't see any. I would just want to point out, and I think there's this one amendment on accessibility is a really important one in here. It's not necessarily an affordable housing amendment, but I think that is a real highlight, I think, of this amendment to help remove barriers from having barriers in housing in our community. So I think that's a real positive one. But very much looking forward to seeing this bylaw passed. I think it's an important first step in our efforts to encourage affordable housing in our community. So you've heard the recommendation, and I'll ask all in favor. And that is carried. Okay, so that moves us on then to the end of the meeting and adjournment. So I have a resolution that this planning committee meeting of June 21st, 2021 hereby adjourns at 9:57 p.m. Is there a mover and seconder? Moved by the deputy mayor, seconded by Councillor Grace. All in favor?